I'm Cole Preston, and today I'm at Blue Island Beer Company for the premiere of my mini documentary on legalization policy in Illinois. I've been following cannabis policy since colorful Colorado legalized it all the way back in the day, and when my home state of Illinois decided to legalize it, I just became enamored. I wondered, what would it actually look like? If you'd like to see how Illinois fell short in achieving meaningful reform in their cannabis policy, you can watch my mini doc now at colememo.com/minidoc.
Great name, dude.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I always like to show people at the beginning of the show why the show is called The Cole Memo. Hirsch, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm displaying your X profile right now. I'll have it linked in the show notes, but I want to give you the space to introduce yourself. This is our first time talking, so pleasure to meet you. I want to give you the space to introduce yourself to me and my audience.
Totally. Cole, it's so great to be on the show, man. So thank you so much for having me. A little bit about me. My name is Hirsch. Obviously, I've worked in the cannabis space for 7 years now, although, I've worked in cannabis in some capacity going back to, when I was 17 years old before I could even vote. Part of that is I grew up in Northern California, in the Bay Area. So cannabis has always been a big part of my life from a young age, even probably younger than it should have been. And, if we had more time, I could spend the whole podcast talking to you about the transformative impact that cannabis has had on my life and how it's shaped, really the person I became. But suffice to say, at a young age, I understood the immense power of cannabis and how it could spur intellectual development and my interest in all sorts of activities. So that's part of the way that I come to this work. I went to college at UC Berkeley, and I worked in the Berkeley Public Defender's Office as the cannabis lead. And so that meant I would defend students that were accused of cannabis violations by the university. And back in the day when I went to college, that meant you could very easily lose your financial aid or get kicked out of school. So I come to this in part through a criminal justice angle, and that's the kind of work that I did in college. After I graduated from college, I went to law school at Harvard, and there I focused on the war on drugs and got to do a lot of work with a lot of race and criminal justice scholars, sort of examining the racially disparate impacts of cannabis criminalization. So that's another piece of this is sort of an academic lens. And then, like many people, I never really expected cannabis to be a career. So before I worked in cannabis, I did a few other things. I was a strategy consultant at McKinsey for a few years. I also worked at Airbnb when it was just at a startup stage and helped build out the policy team at Airbnb, which was a super cool experience, sort of building a legal and regulatory framework around this activity that was getting increasingly popular. And so I got to pass Airbnb regulations in so many of the cities in the United States and across the world, got to live in places like Japan and pass Airbnb regulations there. So that was a really awesome job. And then after that, I jumped into cannabis. After Prop 64 passed in 2016, I knew I had to be involved in the industry, and I'd watched the legalization movement with great interest and attention. And I had this thesis that the same skill set that I used at Airbnb, again, understanding local policy and helping local governments develop a legal framework around this product for which there was demand, but that was illegal, and mitigating some of the concerns regarding this new economy. I had this thesis that same skill set could be applicable in cannabis. And that has turned out to be the case. And, the work that I've done in cannabis has been the most fulfilling, sort of work I've done really in my life. And really that work surrounds understanding the legal and regulatory framework that exists for cannabis in, the 24 adult use states and the medical states that exist, and then helping different entities navigate that environment. So whether it be helping leading retailers in California and across the country open up new dispensaries, whether it be helping brands, brands that I think many of us have heard of before, brands like Level, the Pro Tab product, or Mammoth that makes heavy hitters, and Almora, helping them move into new states and understand who to partner with. but also, working with investors, helping them understand how the regulatory landscape will unfold. So, in short, I think it's sort of being a legal nerd who is passionate about cannabis and helping these entities that are seeking to normalize cannabis and build businesses navigate what is obviously a very complicated regulatory environment. And, going back to Airbnb, I found that many of those same things are true, right? In the same way that it was useful to understand how thousands of cities around the world were managing this new economy. So I've similarly found it useful to analyze what is happening in cities and states and countries across the world. So that analog is strong. And then in addition to, sort of the work that I do to make a living, I am involved with a bunch of nonprofits. I'm on the board of Cal Normal, which, I'm sure many folks know, sort of tries to push a patient's rights perspective when it comes to cannabis. And so we've helped pass laws that make it illegal to fire someone for off-duty cannabis use in California, for example. So that's an organization I'm really passionate about. And I'm also the vice chair of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, which, as its name suggests, attempts to be a chamber of commerce for the cannabis industry and push better public policy. And then I also get to teach law a little bit, which is super fun. As a legal nerd, it's exciting to see cannabis become part of law school curricula. So at law schools like the University of Virginia Law School, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, I get to teach cannabis policy classes, which is super fun too.
That's really cool. That's super cool. Dude, you have enough time to smoke any weed? I feel like you got to make time for smoking weed when you got that much shit going on, bro.
I do manage to find time for that some
Got to
way
make
or
time.
another. And
Yeah.
I mean, if the real answer to your question is I mean, weed has been such a source of intellectual inspiration for me that, consuming cannabis and studying and learning about cannabis is all part of the same cycle, for me at
Yeah.
least.
I use cannabis a lot like coffee, I feel like. I almost thought when I asked you that question, it's almost like sometimes it's not that you have to make time or that, you have to like carve out time. It's that like it helps you get through time. You know what I mean? If
Totally.
that makes sense.
I
So,
think the analogs between the two are totally on point. I'm a huge fan of coffee as I am of cannabis. And look, anything can be abused. Surely people abuse coffee as they do cannabis. But I found that, as you were alluding to, these are two different substances that, if used intelligently and appropriately, can enhance your productivity. And unlike many other substances out there, abuse of these substances doesn't have the same physical sort of consequences as other ones. So I totally agree with that. I find that they go really well together. Like, I
yeah.
like using them in conjunction with one another. And I think these are two substances that have been often portrayed in a negative light when it comes to their harms. But I think science will bear out that the appropriate consumption of these two things can actually be beneficial from a health perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's key right there because like I just started drinking coffee within like the last few years, and as a result of that, it's not like I don't drink caffeinated beverages every once in a while, but the caffeinated beverages that I do drink, like Coca-Cola, they don't have like I wouldn't say like high amounts of caffeine in it. So like when I had a coffee the first time at the office, I was like, again, this was just a few years ago. It was in an office scenario, and I felt like I was like fucking high off of something. Like I was like, wow, this is like actually like a psychic or a psychoactive substance.
Totally.
Everybody, I get why people say now, don't talk to me before my coffee. I was like, wow. But I guess just to wrap it back to the analogy, and then we can get to what we wanted to talk about today. Like with coffee because my tolerance is so low, like I can only drink like half a cup, man. Like, because if I drink a full cup or two, not only am I gonna be awake all fucking day and all night, but I'm actually like spacey all over the place. Kind of like what happens if I'm fucking too high and try to go into a meeting. Like, and that's where I really see the similarities. Like you just said, that was a long way of saying, like you just said, you can overdo it, right? It's all
Totally.
about like moderation, right?
Exactly. And I feel like people can moderate their coffee consumption because it's regulated, right? And because there's normalization regarding different potencies that exist. And yet things are still very opaque when it comes to cannabis. So part of our task is to develop a framework whereby people can avail themselves of the benefits of cannabis, and we can give them guidance about how they can consume it, right, in ways that are beneficial to them rather than overwhelming to them, right? And so
Yeah.
that's, I think, one of the benefits of normalization.
Yeah. So what do you want to talk about first, man? You want to talk about hemp or you want to talk about Florida's Amendment 3?
Let's talk about Amendment 3. Why don't we unpack that? And then maybe our second topic, we can talk about sort of the hemp cannabis culture wars.
Yeah. And you're probably going to do this already, but if you could, just for my listeners, since a lot of them come from Illinois, not all of them do. Some of them come from other states as well. Can you just give a little bit of background as like Amendment 3, what it is, why it's an amendment? I think you were going to kind of lay out those differences, but just for our listeners, yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I'll give a brief description of
Sure.
Amendment 3, and then we can sort of talk about why it's an amendment after that and kind of like, how the initiative process works in Florida. But, in short, as you were alluding to, Amendment 3 is a ballot initiative that all Floridians will vote on this November. So this November, when people are voting for president, in Florida, deciding whether to vote for, Trump or Kamala Harris, they will also get a chance to vote on Amendment 3. Amendment 3 is an initiative that would legalize cannabis or, marijuana in Florida. And look, I know, just a comment on terminology, right? Obviously, we're going to be talking about hemp. And so some people distinguish hemp from marijuana, right? That's sort of the legal term. Other people are uncomfortable with the term marijuana. They think of it as racist. So I'll just use the term cannabis, even though I think we all understand that the cannabis plant, incorporates hemp. But I understand that there are terminology differences there. But yes, what Amendment 3 would do is that it would legalize cannabis in Florida. Right now, as many folks know, there are 24 adult use states. So 24 of the 50 states in this country have legalized cannabis for adults, meaning that if you're 21 years old, right, you can possess and in most of those states purchase cannabis. Florida, if it passes, would be the 25th state to do so. Currently, Florida is medical only. And so what that means is you need a medical card in order to obtain cannabis. Florida has a very robust medical program. There are about 900,000 people in the state of Florida that have a medical card, which is a pretty significant percentage out of the 23 million people that live there. And yeah, that'll be on the ballot this November, as we'll talk about a little bit later. It requires a 60% threshold for approval. Florida is really unique in that respect, in that most other states only require a simple majority. And if this passes and gets more than 60%, then adult use sales will start 6 months later in Florida, right? So the election's on November 5th. That means that May 5th, 2025, or Cinco de Mayo, would be the first day of adult use sales in Florida. So that's it at a high level, although we'll kind of unpack the details more in a second.
Yeah, I was about to ask you a question that I realized I can probably just Google. Does Florida have reciprocity for medical cannabis?
I believe that it does.
Oh, cool. That's
I,
cool.
I believe that it does. The vast majority of states do now. I do think that it does.
Okay, cool. It looks like I just Googled it. It looks like it maybe they don't offer like out-of-state medical cards, reciprocity for out-of-state medical cards. This was some article from May 5th, 2023. I only asked that just because it's interesting to see like some states do. Illinois doesn't either. Michigan does, Missouri does. Missouri, very interesting. You can get a medical, like you could get a medical card. And you probably already know that, Hirsch, because I could get a California medical card right now, being from Illinois. So it's not a completely unique idea. But anyways, sorry for the small tangent. Just
No,
curious.
thanks for bringing that up. And I think after the show, I'm going to look into that a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, look, let's get right to it, man. There's like been a lot of fervor, and I feel like, in some cases, like I feel like people like myself, I'm just trying to point out like the shortcomings, what I perceive to be the shortcomings. There are other people that are saying vote no on this because of this. There are some people, and like it's all over the radar. It's crazy to see, and I'll let you unpack this. Like I saw Ron DeSantis's office is saying this Amendment 3 doesn't allow people to home grow, and it's gonna let people smoke anywhere and everywhere they please. First of all, like let's put the smoking thing aside. For them to even act like they care about home grow, like Ron DeSantis, like
Yeah,
yeah, as if he's like this home grow advocate.
totally.
I think is laughable. But I am bringing these points up to allow you to address them, but also to like let people know that like if you start discussing this online, sometimes it seems like these topics are where the heat comes from on this
Totally.
topic. Am I right?
I think you're totally right. I think home grow and then the charge that this is a monopolistic measure
Yeah.
are some of the main arguments made against it. But yeah, I mean, Cole, I think you're totally right. I would say this Amendment 3 debate, both within the cannabis industry and also in the public sphere, has gotten very vitriolic, has gotten very emotionally charged. There have been a lot of hyperbolic accusations that have been made. And in my opinion, those accusations have not always been fact-based. And so I think it might be useful in this conversation for us to take a step back and before we even talk about Amendment 3, to first unpack what the consequences of cannabis criminalization in the state of Florida is. Like, let's really talk about how that impacts people's lives in Florida. Maybe that's the first thing that we can do. And then I think, secondly, we can discuss, maybe just some context on how Florida's institutions work and how its government works. So if we agree that cannabis criminalization is bad, like what are the different avenues for changing that and moving forward? And then I think after we set out those facts, then we can have the last part of the conversation, which is, okay, in light of that fact, in light of what we know about the impacts of cannabis criminalization in Florida, in light of what we know about the avenues for changing that policy, how do we size up those arguments against Amendment 3? Those charges of banning home grow allegedly, right, and being a monopolistic measure. And I think we can discuss, do those arguments hold up to snuff? And which of those arguments are maybe fair, right? I think that's kind of the point of this conversation, to analyze those arguments in the context of how Florida kind of works. So with that, I think we can just kind of jump into it. I mean,
Yeah.
with the first one, which is like, hey, what is cannabis criminalization in Florida? How does it impact people's lives? And Cole, you just mentioned DeSantis. And if you listen to Ron DeSantis on the campaign trail, he'll repeatedly say nobody is in jail in Florida for cannabis possession. And so I think it's worth kind of like unpacking the facts here from a criminal justice perspective. And the facts are that NORML rates Florida amongst the worst states in the United States for cannabis criminalization. It's near kind of the bottom of the list, despite the fact that it has a robust medical program. And to talk about Florida's laws, if you get caught with more than 20 grams of cannabis in Florida, that's not a lot of weed, right? If you get caught with more than 20 grams, that is a third degree felony charge that is punishable with up to 5 years in prison. And just for some context, right? If you compare this to some of Florida's deep South neighbors, compare it to Georgia, for example, which has never been known to be lenient on criminal justice issues. In Florida, that amount of cannabis is just a misdemeanor, right? So if you have more than 20 grams, again, just repeating that, right, you can technically be charged with a third degree felony and spend 5 years in prison. Now, if you have less than 20 grams, it's only a misdemeanor, right? But still, right, you could be subject to up to 1 year in prison. And just to give you kind of the data, last year, 16,000 people were charged with simple cannabis possession in Florida, and 2,000 people were arrested, right, for having that very small amount of cannabis, just one joint. And it gets even worse when it comes to concentrate products. If you have any amount of concentrate products in Florida, it is a third degree felony. If you have a vape pen in Florida, right, it counts as a third degree felony, and again is punishable for up to 5 years in prison. Now, some people might retort, well, not everyone gets charged in that way, and let's kind of unpack it. One of the more common things that happen, right, if you sort of violate that felony provision and have concentrate products, is that your driver's license, right, can be taken away, right? If you are an immigrant and you are on a visa, that visa can be revoked. And so I think it's important to note that although these penalties aren't imposed every time, there's a lots of discretion that police officers in Florida have, right, when assigning these penalties. And it is local law enforcement. And these, it's not always in places like Miami. They're in the other parts of Florida that you might not visit if you're coming from New York or if you're coming from California. Local law enforcement has a tremendous amount of discretion about how to impose these penalties. And what we know about the American criminal justice system generally, but particularly in Florida, is that if you are lower income, if you are a person of color, you are significantly more likely to face those penalties, right? If you are lower income, right, and you lose your driver's license, that can be a death sentence economically, for
Right.
example,
It
right?
just so happens that discretion sometimes swings a little racist.
Exactly.
You
I mean,
know?
I think that's the heart of a lot of our cannabis policies.
Yeah.
I think that's totally right, right?
I
And
mean, that's
so
been the story, right? Because minorities, it's always been that people like myself, white dudes, it's not like we smoke less weed. We're right on par. We just don't get caught with it.
totally. You're absolutely right.
So,
And look, that is true in a lot of places in this country, not trying to pick on Florida, but objectively. And again, this is true no matter your politics, whether you're a liberal or whether you're a conservative, it is worse in Florida. There's empirical data that demonstrates that people who are charged with the same crimes, like if you're black, you're more likely to be arrested, your sentence is likely to be twice as long, right? And this is true across the criminal justice system in Florida. And that's just a fact we have to avail ourselves of.
Yeah.
There's that criminal justice piece of it, and that's just kind of data, right? We're throwing out data on arrests. Maybe another way to think about it is from like if we think about common examples in our life, right? So a lot of people may be familiar with the Tyreek Hill incident. For those that don't know, Tyreek Hill is a football player for the Miami Dolphins. And a couple of weeks ago, he was arrested on his way to a Dolphins game, or he had an encounter with the police on the way to a Dolphins game, right? And I guess I would just say there's a lot of people in Florida, right, who look like Tyreek Hill that are not famous football players and whose activities are not being recorded on camera. There's a lot of police interactions in Florida between people, again, who are black and look like Tyreek Hill, but don't have his level of visibility. And so obviously there wasn't cannabis involved in that particular case, but I bring that up because it shines a light on the interactions that routinely happen, even to star football players, with folks who are in communities of color in Florida and law enforcement. And one of the things that we know to be true, and Cole, I saw you kind of posting an article somewhat about this today in Illinois, is that cannabis is often used as a pretext, right, for these police interactions. The scent of cannabis, right, is often used as a mechanism for police to have probable cause to intervene of the lives, to use their discretion, right, to intervene of the lives of those who are poor, right, and of those who
And
are
ultimately steal their property. Right.
steal their property. Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, and
And
sometimes
violate the rights. Yeah.
exactly, right? To your point, there's no great data on how many police interactions resulted in some kind of violence as a result, right, of cannabis kind of initiating that encounter. And
Yeah.
so I guess that's a way of saying, right, like, although not everyone who is caught with weed in Florida goes to prison for 5 years, we can see that it enables the racially disparate application of our criminal justice system, all kinds of encounters with police, which disproportionately impact people who are from communities of color. And then I would also say, putting kind of like being in prison aside, what the Restoration Rights Project has found is that Florida is one of the hardest states in the country to get your record expunged. So even if you're just charged and you don't go to jail, right, or you briefly go to jail and you come out of jail, that's going to be on your record for a long time in Florida. That makes it much more difficult to obtain employment, right? That makes it much more difficult to obtain housing, and that contributes to a racial wealth gap in Florida, right? So that's also deeply problematic. And then the other thing, I think is important to note, and not everyone may know this history, and I think it's important to know this history as we're talking about Florida. Florida is really unique in that they have long had what is called a felon disenfranchisement rule, right? And this goes back all the way to the end of the Civil War, right? So in 1868, a few years after the Civil War ended, Florida was looking for a way to disenfranchise newly freed slaves, but they couldn't do that because it was still Reconstruction and because the Congress had just passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So what Florida did is it passed a law that said, if you are a felon, then we can take away your voting rights, right? And so it basically allowed them to disenfranchise newly freed slaves. And even though, black folks made up a minority of residents in Florida shortly after the Civil War, within years of this passing in 1868, 95% of people who were disenfranchised as a result of the felon disenfranchisement rule were black, right? And so you might be asking, Cole, like, why are you talking about this? This was a few years after the Civil War, like, that this isn't relevant. Well, that law, although there was a ballot initiative that tried to pare it back, that law is still on the books today. So right now in the state of Florida, I mean, I really want everyone to think about this. 15%, 1 out of 6 African Americans of voting age in the state of Florida cannot vote, right, because of this felon disenfranchisement law. So this kind of all paints, and a lot of that, right? A lot of that is because of drug crimes. So I think that's the important context to understand regarding the state of Florida. There has consistently been, and I'm not trying to suggest that it's the year 1868 anymore. There has consistently been a racially disparate application of these criminal justice laws. We've talked about how you could end up, in jail as a result. Even if you don't end up in jail, they could take away your visa. They could take away, your driver's license. They could saddle you with a criminal record that makes it very difficult for you to get a job. And if you end up in one of those felony buckets, then you can't vote. And I got to say, we talk often about how Florida is a red state. I mean, I would remind you that when Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton in Florida in 2016, he won by 1 point, right? The fact that 1 out of 6 Black folks in Florida cannot vote because of this felon disenfranchisement law has huge impacts not only in Florida, but also on national politics. And it's not really an accident that things work that way. So
And
that
you'd
is all
probably
the way.
lose other, I don't mean to cut you off, but you probably lose other rights too, like the right to bear arms. It's usually something that comes with a felony, depending on the felony. Just a quick question because you made me think of it, and I don't think you have the answer, so maybe we can just laugh about it. Can Donald Trump even vote then if he's got a felony?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There are legal scholars who are debating this. I don't think it's going to stop him from voting. And quick side note,
Sure.
what's interesting is that in 2018, right? So after 140 years, 150 years of this law existing, and it's totally relevant to our conversation today. The conservative folks of Florida actually passed a ballot initiative that said felons should be able to get their voting rights reinstated. So 65% of Florida voters actually passed a law saying, hey, this is BS, right? Like you should
Yeah.
be able to, if you've gotten out of prison, to continue voting. What is interesting is that the Florida legislature later passed a law and said, okay, that's true. But by the way, you don't get your voting rights back until you've paid off all of your court fines and fees. And I ask you, who has the ability to pay off those fines and fees, right? It's not poor Black folks that have
No.
the ability, right? So there's a sort of complicated and muddied kind of like legal state of this felon disenfranchisement. But suffice to say, even though there are efforts to pare it back, like this was done pretty explicitly to disenfranchise, Black people after the Civil War, it remains in effect today. Again, notably, this provision was re-upped in the late 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement. That was not a coincidence, right? And so that is the shadow that looms over the criminal justice system in Florida. And again, I think it's important to note, there may be folks out there. Again, Ron DeSantis often says nobody's in jail for cannabis in Florida, sort of alluding to the fact that like, hey, weed is basically okay here, right? Like no one's getting in trouble for weed. But really, I think if we're being honest, what he's saying there is no one who is like Ron DeSantis is getting in trouble for weed, right? No one who is white, who is wealthy, and who's educated is really concerned about cannabis possession in Florida. But if you look like Tyreek Hill, right, then I think you may end up having more problems. And so I think that's just one comment on the criminal justice debate in
And could
Florida. Yeah,
I wanted to ask you something that I feel like adds to your point. When Ron DeSantis says something like that, I saw somebody say, "Okay, Ron, the number of people in prison right now for whatever cannabis charge you might be referring to, whatever, might be low, but the number of people that are having to be booked, that's still like that's the problem. There's you still like you said, there's discretion, there's still an interaction with law enforcement, and you can downplay it by saying, well, they're not in a cage, but it's like, all right, well, okay, yeah, but they're being booked and they're having to deal with armed guards of the state, for lack of better words, for something that's a non-violent crime. So they're in a dangerous situation and they're getting fucked by the system. I just
totally,
felt I don't know if you can like confirm or deny the kind of like the thesis that I just laid out there, but I heard that as a good I thought I don't know if it's accurate, but I thought it was a good counter to DeSantis's point. Okay, may not be a bunch of people in a cage right now, but they're still being processed through the system. And
totally.
your point about, the disparate enforcement is still powerful, but I felt like that kind of like pokes a hole, deflates his point a little bit, you know?
Totally. I mean, I think you articulated it well, better than I could. So you're absolutely right. Like you're not in a cage, but there's many definitions of freedom, right? One
Right.
definition of freedom is not being in a cage. Another, definition of freedom is not having a potentially violent encounter with law enforcement for no good.
Right.
Another definition of freedom is being able to get a job, right? Another definition of freedom is being able to obtain housing. Another definition of freedom is being able to have your driver's license so you can go to work, right? I think we all know many people in this country today that are not in bars, but that have been disenfranchised, right, as a result of their economic circumstances or their past history with the criminal justice system. So
Right.
I think you're totally right, and that I think is the issue, and I would just kind of conclude maybe this part of the conversation by saying it is not accurate to state that there are no negative impacts associated with cannabis criminalization in Florida. And again, when someone like Ron DeSantis is saying that, what he's essentially saying is for people like me, right? There aren't such impacts. And I think as many of us have this debate, when there are some folks, say in the hemp space, that try to minimize the impacts of being arrested for weed, I'm always curious to sort of look and see, do those folks look like Ron DeSantis, or do they look like Tyreek Hill? At least in my observation, I haven't really seen a ton of people who look like Tyreek Hill saying, hey, no big deal, weed is totally fine in Florida. I don't know a ton of people in rural conservative Florida who say, who are black or low income and are saying that this isn't a problem. And so I think we have to be mindful of the fact that the criminal justice system, particularly in Florida, is not applied in a fair way. And just because you have never had those encounters, right? When you go to Miami Beach, doesn't mean that those encounters don't exist when you go to the Florida Panhandle
Right.
or
And not
Central.
to, because we'll get back to this, not to take us on too much of a tangent, but I get just to illustrate your point. I think what you're saying is, and maybe this is too watered down, but like I believe this to be true in many ways. So I think this is what you're saying. Like I could probably, again, because discretion swings in my favor, I could like maybe make the case like this is just THCA flower, man. Get off my back. Google it. I dare you. But if you're like, somebody where that discretion and that understanding doesn't swing in your way, and they've already got guns out because they smell weed, they don't fucking care THC, whatever. You've got fucking weed. Get your hands up and get on the ground. Like I'm again, not to get too like serious, but to your point, the people I didn't think about it that way, honestly. I was like, yeah, man, I like lean on hemp as like, and we'll get to that again. But I also have a lot of things pulling in my favor. So to your point, I do know a few. Not that it has to be about that, like a pick out token, like I know some black hemp advocates. I don't mean to be like that.
Yeah,
But I take your point, and
totally.
you can see
Totally.
that I feel like I understand what you're trying to say. So
Yeah, no, I think you said it well. And, maybe the only other thing I'll say is, I'm not trying to disparage law enforcement. I'm not trying to suggest that, every cop out there is a bad actor. We live in a heavily militarized society, right? Where the cops have a lot
yeah,
of, and people, especially in the state of Florida, have a lot of guns. I guess the point is we are initiating an endless string of needless encounters that serves no public purpose. And
right.
although in many circumstances, right, if you're white, you're okay, or if you're black, maybe you turn out okay. On the other hand, in many circumstances, something tragic, results, whether it might be violence or something that actively derails your life. And so we are putting there is no reasonable public good that is served by initiating these encounters between law enforcement and people that merely possess marijuana. And these are all the reasons why cannabis criminalization in Florida is really problematic. And again, I know we'll get to Amendment 3 in a second, but I do think that's really hard to dispute. I think it's really hard to look at the facts in Florida and to minimize the negative impacts of cannabis criminalization. Again,
Yeah.
especially if you consider it from the perspective of someone who doesn't look like you and may just structurally have more challenging police encounters than you might.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if again, it sounded like you were about to move on to the next subject, but I wanted to put a bow on it, just citing from language from Illinois. And I think this is our point. These are the first words out of the Illinois Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. These are the top priorities. In the interest of allowing law enforcement to focus on violent and property crime, the General Assembly finds and declares the use of cannabis should be legal for persons 21 years of age or older and should be taxed in a manner similar to alcohol. The point that I'm trying to make, and I think the point you just tried to make by leading with this, is that, yes, again, we're not disparaging law enforcement. We want to give them the capacity to focus on things that actually matter. We're actually
Totally.
supporting law enforcement, I think, in that way. I think law enforcement would rather not deal with oh man, you got a little joint in your back pocket. I mean, again, some of them maybe that have ulterior motives and like fucking with people. Maybe they like using this as an excuse, but I think most of them are good people, like you said. And I think they would appreciate the ability to just focus on the things that actually matter. You know, we need to take away their discretion from these nonviolent offenses.
I
So,
honestly, I think that was really well said. And, you highlighting that preamble there kind of really makes the point, right? Like that it is at the beginning of that preamble for a reason, and it
yeah,
illustrates what the reasoning was behind why cannabis legalization is important, right? And why it's beneficial for law enforcement.
yeah.
So yeah.
Hell yeah, dude. Well, did you have it seemed like you were working and it seemed like you were segueing from criminal justice maybe to a different point.
Yeah, I think that's the first point, which is just criminal
Sure.
justice. again, which is like, hey, like it is really problematic from a racial and economic and other perspective, cannabis
Hmm.
criminalization. So if we can agree on that, then I think the next step, right, as we have this discussion, all of us in this cannabis hemp community, right, is okay, well then how do we effectuate change? I think that's the next question. How does change work in Florida? How do Florida's institutions work, right? How do laws change? And again, right, not everybody has time to examine the governing structures in each state. So let's talk about how Florida works, right? The first thing to know about Florida, as we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, is Florida is in general really hostile to direct democracy. Now, what I mean by that is first the ballot initiative process. Florida is the only state in the country that requires a 60% threshold in order to have an initiative pass, right? So in California, where I live, Prop 64 passed with 57% of the vote, right? And so then we were able to legalize cannabis. Florida is one of the unique states that requires a 60% threshold. So that illustrates they're not huge fans of direct democracy. They don't really like allowing the people to change laws. So
Hmm.
that's one piece of it. The other piece of it, before you even get to that vote, is the Supreme Court review process in Florida. And some folks on the call may know this. Florida, like a few other states, has something called the single subject rule, which is to say, they're like, okay, if you want to put something on the ballot, it has to touch on a single subject. You cannot put forth an initiative that says, hey, let's like legalize abortion and like legalize weed and legalize sports gambling, right? It has to focus on a single subject. And that makes some sense, right? We think people should weigh in on single questions, and it muddies the waters if they weigh in on multiple things. So this is a requirement that has a theoretical justification. But in Florida, the way this rule is applied is basically applied in a way to eliminate any initiative that the justices or the people in power don't like, right? So out of the 7 Supreme Court justices on the Florida Supreme Court right now, 6 of them were appointed by Ron DeSantis. So this is a DeSantis approved court, right? And they apply this single subject rule in an extremely narrow way, right? In a way that invalidates basically, going back to the idea that they don't love democracy, that gives them an excuse to prevent any initiative from appearing on the ballot, right? So if this initiative, Amendment 3, which we'll discuss in a second, had said, hey, both we want to legalize weed and we want to allow people to have their records expunged, for example, right? That would have violated the single subject rule in Florida. So that's all a way of saying this rule is applied in a very strict, narrow way to invalidate different initiatives that exist. And so this year, right, there were 2 initiatives that we'll talk about today that were making an effort to appear on the ballot and that ultimately did appear on the ballot. One was cannabis legalization, and another was an initiative to protect abortion rights, right, to basically extend the sort of months during which you could have an abortion. I think it's important to note that although these initiatives were written up in a very narrow way, they barely passed the Supreme Court review process, right? So the cannabis initiative passed 5-2, and the abortion initiative barely passed
Oh,
4 to.
so it had so like when they let's just back up for a second. Before it actually gets onto the ballot, before you can even do that bullshit 65, what was it, 65% threshold?
60.
60, 60.
Yeah.
Um, before you even get the opportunity to try to fight that battle, it goes through the Supreme Court. Sorry, I just wanted to.
Correct. Yes. And I should have been more clear about that. You're
No, I
absolutely
think you were. I think I missed it, but thank you for, yeah, clarifying that.
totally.
Anyways,
Totally.
though.
For sure. And we should note that there were attempts to put something on the ballot for cannabis in 2020 and 2022, right?
Right.
And those initiatives failed in part because of the single subject rule.
And
So yeah, this
and
year the Supreme Court had an April 1st deadline to certify this for approval. So on April 1st, they said, okay, this can appear on the ballot and this November we'll vote. But they applied this rule in a really strict way. And I'll just say, right, basically there are some justices on the Supreme Court that still have some measure of judicial integrity, right? This cannabis initiative, and again, this is the criticism, right, that is being leveraged by its opponents, was written in a super, super, super narrow way to touch on a single subject and just to say, hey, we're going to legalize cannabis, right? Now, despite that, several justices tried to gut both the cannabis and the abortion initiatives. But some, right, 5 in the case of cannabis and 4 in the case of abortion, this of the 7 decided to let it stand because they basically knew if they didn't let these initiatives move forward, they were basically undermining the entire initiative process in Florida, right? These initiatives were written in such a narrow way that these justices, despite the fact that they are partisan, like a lot of judges out there, knew that if they took that step, right, then they would have essentially been violating the Florida Constitution, right? And would have been, invalidating initiatives that they just disagreed with. So despite that fact, these initiatives barely appeared on the ballot. And it's notable that after these justices, to some people's surprise, allow these initiatives to move forward, like Ron DeSantis has been really seriously criticizing them publicly. If anyone's followed his comments, especially in recent weeks, he has been criticizing those decisions, saying the Supreme Court did not do its job by allowing these initiatives onto the ballot, basically signaling, hey, if you want me to appoint you in the future, like you're going to have to show complete fealty to me. And so I I I think it's, I think the main point there is that, Florida requires that 60% threshold. It makes it really hard for these initiatives to appear on the ballot. There's a theoretical justification here that it has to touch on a single subject, but that rule is basically applied in a way to invalidate initiatives that folks disagree with.
Mm.
And we can understand why, right? Like, given that this abortion initiative appeared on the ballot 4-3, because of that, Donald Trump has to talk about the abortion initiative now. I'm sure he would not like to talk about it. He would prefer not to talk about it, but now he has to because it appears on the ballot. So I think that's one piece of this, right? Which is to say, Florida is really hostile to direct democracy. It's really hard for initiatives to pass, and even when they appear on the ballot, they have to be written in a very narrow way. So that's when it comes to direct democracy. So someone might say in response, well, just pass a law, right? If you don't want something to go through the initiative process, you should just go ahead and pass a law. And there, I think the important thing to understand is that Florida is a very gerrymandered state, right? It has a GOP supermajority. And again, just to unpack this a little bit, a lot of people think of Florida as like a deep red state, and that's why it has a GOP supermajority in its legislature. But just to be factual, right? In the last 4 presidential elections, the Democrats have won twice and the Republicans have won twice, right? Barack Obama won Florida in 2008 and 2012, and then Donald Trump won Florida in 2016 and then in 2020, right? So out of the past 4 presidential elections, the Democrats have won twice and the Republicans have won twice. When Trump won, he won by really narrow margins. And again, I'm just trying to poke holes in this thesis that Florida is some super red state.
Yeah.
When Trump beat Hillary Clinton, he beat Hillary Clinton by 1 point, right? When Trump beat Joe Biden in Florida, he beat Biden by 3 points, right? So decent margins, but not overwhelming, right? When Barack Obama won Florida, right, he won the first time by 7 points and the second time by 4 points, much bigger margins. And so I think that's all a way of saying, yes, Florida has a really conservative legislature, right? They have the kind of legislature that kind of looks like Texas, but Florida is actually much closer to a 50-50 state. And because of that, right, the Florida legislature, because it has a supermajority, will never legalize weed. I mean, it's really that simple. A Republican state senator by the name of Jeff Brandes has been trying to legalize weed in Florida for nearly a decade, right? He basically said the Florida legislature is never going to do it. So again, I think it's important to understand as we're having this conversation about how change happens, right? At the very beginning, we just kind of punctured the myth that it's no big deal that weed is illegal in Florida. And so hopefully, again, before we get to Amendment 3, hopefully we can all agree that that policy needs to be changed. We just talked about how narrow that avenue for change is within the ballot initiatives. And then the other point is that it is going to be quite literally impossible to ever get the Florida Republican Party and their GOP supermajority to legalize weed. The other thing that I will say, right, that I think just confirms this year, the state of Florida introduced a bill that would raise the threshold for ballot initiatives from 60 to 67%, right? And that would basically mean that it's impossible. The initiative process would never pass. And again, why did
Everybody has to agree.
I mean, it really is deeply anti-democratic, right? And again, why did they do that? Because, and this goes back to my point about Florida not being as red as people think, even though they have Ron DeSantis at the helm. That's because Florida has a history of voting for liberal ballot initiatives because when you allow the people to weigh in on those issues, they're actually broadly supportive, right? Florida passed that law that I mentioned in 2018, giving felons the right to vote again, even though the legislature later gutted it. Florida passed a law, right? When Trump was on the ballot in Florida Florida passed a minimum wage law that got 10 points more support than Donald Trump. Florida passed a law in 2016 that legalized medical cannabis, and it got almost 72% of the vote, right? Which is the most that any ballot initiative in Florida history has ever gotten. And so there's kind of this feeling like, oh, isn't that so weird? Florida, this deep red state, keeps voting for these liberal ballot initiatives, but it's like, no, Florida is a deep red state, and I'm not trying to deny that there are strong conservative elements in Florida. Like, obviously, I get that. But Florida's state legislature looks like Texas, even though Florida is not Texas, right? Florida is a
Yeah.
much swingier state than Texas. And so, given that, right, given the legislature's interest in raising the threshold to 67%, I would just say it's 2024 or bust, guys, right? This is quite literally one of our last opportunities in near history, right? In the near future to legalize cannabis in Florida. And again, I can say that with confidence because the Florida legislature is not going to do it. They're likely going to try and raise the threshold for this appearing on the ballot to 67, which would make this nearly impossible. And now that Ron DeSantis has basically signaled, like, hey, if you let these initiatives on in the future, like, I'm looking for judges that will not allow these initiatives on, every Supreme Court justice in Florida will take their cues. And so I think that's just, again, before we talk about Amendment 3 itself and these comments about it being monopolistic and home grow,
Sure.
I think what is really hard to argue is these first 2 points. One, cannabis criminalization in Florida is deeply problematic, particularly racially, economically, and otherwise. And number two, it's not like we have abundant options about how we move forward here. There's a very narrow window and a very unique opportunity, which is right now in November 2024, to legalize cannabis. And so, as we'll go on in a second, we can acknowledge some of the flaws in this initiative and we can be honest about them, right? But it's also important for us to recognize that this is a unique moment in history. And anyone who is suggesting, right, that, hey, this should be done through the legislature, I mean, that's a kind of willful dishonesty, right? That's not just ignorance. Like that is a lie, right? This is the opportunity to do this. And then I think as we talk about Amendment 3, I mean, the way I think about it right now that we've kind of set the table is like, in light of what we just discussed, in light of how deeply problematic, weed being illegal in Florida is, and in light of the options we had ahead of us, like, what are the arguments for rejecting this initiative, right? In light of how awful the status
Before
quo.
we get to arguments on rejecting, just because, if you don't mind, I wanted
No.
to let's like, because I wanted to let you finish your point about single subject and stuff, and I'm not I totally agree with everything that you laid out. I've heard about everything that you laid out. In fact, I don't know if you made this point. I think you made this point, but just in case you didn't, to reiterate this point, and correct me if I'm wrong. But as you said, there have been former ballot measures that have failed because they were seen as like too not narrow enough. And those ballot measures like did have homegrown stuff, in addition to like maybe some of these components. So like you said, am I correct in understanding they narrowed it down so that it would better qualify as that single subject idea? Now, here's my question, and I'm not like, again, not even trying to like debate these points because I feel like you're going to pick up what I'm putting down because you did a really good job of setting the stage, and I have some now that I've seen how Illinois politics works. It sounds a lot like Florida politics in a different, different way, but there's these silly hoops you have to jump through, not only in the political realm, but like yeah, in the league, trying to pass policy and everything else. And like in Illinois, before I get to this, like for example, yeah, it's really hard to get something on as a ballot measure. I don't know the numbers like with Florida, where it's like 60%. Like I don't know if Illinois has a threshold like for ballot measures or anything. I can just tell you that, like, from what I understand, it's really hard to even get something on as a ballot measure in Illinois just because of how the legislature has postured themselves, if you will. So, in understanding that, like, in giving you that, and kind of like, again, thanking you for setting that stage, because if I didn't know that about, like, have a little intro into Florida politics, I've heard that point made, and I try to be cognizant of, like, hey, Cole, some of your critiques about like Amendment 3 are because they have to like conform to that single subject definition. And my thing is, and again, I'm just curious your take on this. Like, I view legalization as a single subject, and that includes those. Like, it's crazy to me that it's like I don't know how we have to word it, but it is a single subject. Like, and I think so. Could you? I'm again not to debate you. Do you recall did they did they issue the Supreme Court like so you mentioned the odor proof thing. They issued like some of their basis upon why they ruled the way they did. Some people decided not to rule, for example. Do you recall like specifically with home grow, or did they call anything out like that where they were like, that is too expansive, you know?
Totally. No, that's exactly right. So there have been two, I mean, everything you said, I agree with, right? So there have been two prior, efforts in modern history to
Hmm.
legalize, recreational cannabis. There was one in 2020, and that failed primarily because it was trying to get off the ground during COVID and it ran into some funding, challenges. There was also single subject concerns, but that's part of the reason that the one in 2020 failed. The potential 2022 initiative failed because it violated the single subject rule because of that home grow provision, because it contained it in there. And so what happened when the Supreme Court was rendering its decision is they issued a roadmap, right? Because they said, hey, this violated the single subject rule. Because again, I mean, I take your
How?
point.
Did they say how?
Well, I mean, because it is two, I mean, according to the way a lawyer reads this, those are two different subjects. Now, I take your point that this is all the same thing, but in their mind, it's one thing to legalize sort of the possession and sale of cannabis. It's quite another thing to legalize the right to grow it in certain amounts, right, in your backyard. Now,
Even what you just said though, like, and I get what you're saying. Again, I'm not even trying to debate you, but like, how do they view possession as sale and sale, literally two distinct terms as a single subject?
that's the counter argument,
You
right?
know what I
That's
mean?
the counter argument that you could break any subject into a series of subsidiary smaller subjects. So yeah, I agree
Fair.
with you. If I were on the Florida Supreme Court, right? And I think that's a point that the one liberal justice on the court made in a dissent before. But yeah, you're totally right. I think the crux of what you're describing is there is any way that you can categorize something into a series of distinct subjects, and based on that, use it to say, hey, this is invalid. So I don't have a great response for you there,
Sure.
other than the
Yeah.
fact that the Supreme Court basically said, hey, dude, you guys included home grow. That violates the single subject rule. And then what they did is they issued what is called a roadmap, right? Like it's
Yeah.
kind of incumbent upon judges when they say, hey, you violated this rule. Law kind of dictates that they have to describe for you what constitutes compliance. So long story short, the Smart and Safe initiative, after that happened in 2022, scrupulously read that ruling, right, by the Florida Supreme Court. And they basically said, like, hey, guys, like, if you want to get this in front of us again, it has to be drawn as narrowly as possible, right? Which again, right, Amendment 3 basically says these medical businesses are now adult use businesses. It doesn't
Yeah.
really say anything more than that. And I mean,
Yeah.
just
It
going
looks
down
like they just strike it. They just strike medical
totally.
and they just say marijuana production. Yeah. That's kind of
Totally,
smart.
right? And if you think about it, right, like if you take the medical initiative, if that passed, right, if that complied with the legal requirements that exist, the best way to get an adult use initiative is to just strip the medical language, right, and make that adult use language because it's quite
Wait, so will
identical.
the medical program be no more?
No, the medical program will continue to exist, right? But this
Okay.
is sort of like, hey, we're going to pass another initiative and we're going to substitute in, right?
Is the medical program also an amendment?
Yes, the medical program passed by amendment in 2016. Um,
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so in 2016, it passed with 72% of the vote. Yeah.
Nice. Nice.
But yeah,
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
you take my point. And again, I'm not
totally.
even trying to, since we fucking, dude, one of the main things I talk about on my show, besides this, well, and we'll get to him too, and, I'll kind of make the pitch because I feel like it relates to what I'm about to say. Like the idea that this stuff could go on in some fashion, and by this stuff, I mean the criminalization of cannabis, just um it's a punch to the gut, when they like when that's the result of it, because that argument was made in Illinois, the argument's been made in Florida. Like people come up with different arguments as to how we keep basically cannabis policy conservative, and I know it's like maybe I'm young and a little bit too like I maybe I'm too optimistic and such. I'm just actually curious since we both set the stage and we both do have a clear passion for the criminalization of cannabis. Again, not even trying to debate you, setting aside the whole debate, setting aside Florida Amendment 3, isn't it just a fucking punch to the gut that these like bureaucrats and policymakers and some lobbyists even have managed to complicate such a simple fucking subject? Like I like to say it this way before we move on, like Look, don't get me wrong. There have always been dry spells in my time trying to get weed. But my problem with weed was never getting weed. I could always get weed. Again, sometimes dry, that sucks. That builds character though. I always like to say. Just jokingly.
Hey,
Anyways, the problem was always I was looking over my shoulder, even acknowledging less so maybe than others, but still I was concerned about it, and I've been pulled over and I'm like, is this gonna be it? And fortunately, I've lucked out many times, you know what I mean? But like that was always the concern, and the fact that I actually want to give credit where credit is due, and maybe this is how we can segue. And I actually said this on a recent podcast. One of the things I like most about Florida's Amendment 3 is it's creating one of the largest possession limits in the country. And um, Donald Trump referred to it as small amounts, which I love. I agree. 3 ounces is a small amount. Um, you know, uh, it's a good start, though. It's better. It makes Illinois, it makes Colorado. I think even maybe California. I don't know the possession limit in California, but definitely Illinois and Colorado. I know it's like 30-gram possession limit. That makes it look small. They got 3 ounces. They're showing them how it's done. So I like to give credit where credit is due there. That's really awesome,
totally,
you know.
100%. I mean, I think
But
that that's a huge step forward there for
I
sure.
wanted to give you the space on the question because I kind of segued. Setting all those policies aside, doesn't it fucking suck that it's been so like been made so complicated when it's really fucking simple, you know?
I mean, I totally agree with all that, right? And you mentioned like
Yeah,
politics, bureaucrats. The only way the cannabis movement has moved forward is because of citizens driving it forward, right? Like, let's not
true.
forget when Colorado legalized in 2012, every single statewide official, literally every single statewide official in Colorado came out against that initiative, and it passed with 55% of the vote, right? So this is a citizen-driven movement. And again, this goes back to why I think things like Amendment 3 are so important. It's one of the very narrow avenues we have to exhibit how the public feels about this topic and to move things forward. So
And maybe this is where you're about to segue, but the only thing I'll say about that, I agree with like how you laid that out, but it's unfortunate that it feels like, and I feel like this is another talking point. So I'm sure the talking point that I've heard, but I think it's true because this happened in Illinois too. It feels like we're living in a gilded age that we can only get policy passed if certain corporations support it. You know what I mean? Like, and
totally.
I'm not knocking them. Like, I actually am thankful. It's again, I've never actually said vote no on Amendment 3. I've had people on my show that has. All I've said is I just think it's a step in the right direction. It doesn't go far enough. If I were in Florida, I'd probably vote for it. I don't know. I just so that I wouldn't have to, because that's what I did in Illinois, honestly. And then I learned about the shortcomings of our system, and now that's what I talk about now. And I guess my whole sorry to kind of like go on because I want to give you more space. The reason I'm so passionate in pointing out the shortcomings of Amendment 3, and I think maybe sometimes people wonder this, like, you're fucking from Illinois. Who the fuck are you to talk about this? It's like, yeah, exactly. I am from Illinois, and I've learned how hard it is. It's been 4 years, 5 years almost, and we can't get policy passed. We just 2 years ago, we made it so that people that were charged with cannabis crimes could get their cannabis crimes expunged. And people might try to fact check me here. What I mean by that is there's a drug testing requirement up until 2 years ago. And you couldn't get your cannabis record expunged unless you stopped smoking weed for like a month. Otherwise, they're like, no. So it's like, that was so hard to get through. We can't get home growth through. And I guess like the reason I'm so passionate about reminding people that there are shortcomings and something to fight for, again, not a reason to vote no, but something to keep your fucking mind on and don't forget, is because in Illinois, I feel like because there's like a weed dispensary in a lot of big towns, people have just become apathetic to the idea of any more reform. Like even my parents sometimes, because I do this podcast, like, why are you complaining about weed? Like you can just go to the store and it's like, yeah,
Well,
but that's not really what it's all about, you know?
totally, totally. Yeah. I
So
mean, I think you made a bunch of good points there. I just want to
yeah, sorry
respond.
for that was
No,
kind of a watershed of points, but
you're good. First, I'm sympathetic to the idea that many people are like, oh, the issue's resolved, right? When I talk to all my friends in Colorado, they're like, we can't get legislators to do anything because
yes.
they thought we dealt with this issue a year ago. So I'm totally sympathetic to that, right? And there's still more to do. I want to make a point though about your point about corporate power, because I agree with you, right? Like I'm a citizen of this country. I don't want policy to be governed by large corporate interests. The average American doesn't want that, right? But think about why these companies have to spend that money in the first place. Why is it that that infusion of corporate cash is necessary? Well, it's necessary because running statewide campaigns are really expensive, and you have to run those campaigns because legislators are ignoring popular will. So I'm sympathetic to the idea that it's like only when corporations get involved can we move things forward. But the only reason those corporate resources are necessary is to overcome the legislative inertia that comes from legislators ignoring their constituents. So it's kind of rich to hear, the Republican legislature of Florida that has ignored their citizenry on this issue for over a decade, then try to point to big bad corporation. And look, I get it, right? Most Americans, understandably, are skeptical of corporate power. So it's a really
I
compelling,
think
yeah,
I don't mean to cut you off, but I think one of the thoughts somebody told me last night because I premiered my mini documentary where I point out that again, our policy was a step in the right direction and it mainly got passed to your point. The only reason we got a lot of energy because they poured like over $600,000 into a measure in Illinois. And that's what we know of. There's a lot of information that's protected by Illinois law that's just what you can find via public record. That's from the Chicago Tribune. Um, so I guess one thing that somebody said to me last night that I thought was interesting, because to your point, that's how sometimes things get done. I think like I hope that the role that I play is redefining because I feel like what they do, to your point, is they're like almost fulfilling a role in corporate social responsibility, a term I learned about in like some fucking econ class or some or well, I don't even know what class it was, but they said it the other night and I was like, "Oh my God, that's the term I've been looking for, corporate social responsibility." So I feel like that's their first step, passing these measures, which in some ways we can both agree are baby steps. Like if you don't have home grow or something like that, it's like, well, you could improve in that way. Um, I guess I hope my role is in talking about those things and pointing them out is that I redefine what their responsibility is, and hopefully they completely legalize cannabis like we expect it to be. You know what I mean?
totally. I
So
mean, I think
I
we're,
again
we're
got lost in my point. Sorry.
I think we're absolutely on the same page, and I think that's the point of this conversation. At
Yeah.
least, what I hope people take away from this conversation, or at least the dialogue you and I are having, even if we just think of it as a private dialogue, is I think the right move is yes, Amendment 3 is a step forward, and then we have more work to do, right? Like that's the way that I think about it. This is the critical step forward that moves us into a new world, which allows us to do the things we need to do to truly make this plant available to people. And so that's a
Now,
way your critique is valuable in that
right.
respect, but it reminds people that the work is not done on November 5th. So that's why I think it's important to point out everything that needs to be done after this. Yeah,
And to your point, now is more important. It's like almost in addition to cannabis, especially for Floridians that may be tuning in. Now is more important than ever to get involved, not only with cannabis, but if they're trying to fucking increase the percentages for your ballot measures, if you have a problem with homegrown not being in there, that's going to be a issue for you in the future. You're going to run into that as an issue. The other point you made is you said this will be, if you say this will be done through the legislature, that's a lie or something to that effect. Somebody said that. I don't know that maybe you were quoting somebody else. So with that in mind, Floridians, like you already have an uphill battle. So now is the time to get involved. You know what I mean?
totally, totally,
Especially
100%.
before they make it fucking harder, you know? So.
Totally. I mean, it's hard to get 67% vote on anything. So yeah, 100%.
I don't know where you want to move on from here. I mean, we can keep talking about Amendment 3 and or hemp in Florida, but that is a depressing thought as well. Not to, that was a really optimistic note I just went on, but it's depressing to think that like you kind of set the stage with vote for Amendment 3, and I agree, step in the right direction. We both agree, step in the right direction. It is depressing to think that next steps are going to be really fucking hard, especially if something like those things pass through. And again, I hope that some companies listening right now and fulfills and like for example, True Leaf said they wanted home grow. Like I really hope I doubt Kim Rivers is listening right now, but I hope somebody that know like I hope they fucking follow up on that commitment.
Yeah, and well, let's talk about that. I mean, let's talk
You know?
about yeah. Yeah, I
Because
mean,
I know that they do like I'm not I want to be clear. I know that they're not completely like anti-home grow. They like sell clones and genetics in other states. I'm not even, that's not really like the argument I'm making. Again, I'm trying to redefine like corporate social responsibility, this term I was reminded of the other night. And I hope that that's their goal. Like you don't just do this little thing to get you like a lot of money. Like you got to follow up, you know?
totally. Let's talk about that because the terms monopoly and home grow have been or home grow ban have been thrown out a lot. So
Yeah.
I think let's next entertain both of those arguments, right?
Yeah.
So let's start with this argument, right? That Amendment 3 creates a monopoly, right? And then let's talk about the home grow um, uh, sort of argument. So first I want to say like look, I think most Americans share those anti-monopolistic values, right? We are all consumers. We all intuitively understand that a monopoly is not good for us, right? I think no matter your politics, there's a broad understanding that monopolies do not serve consumers and that the only way that capitalism can work is if there is competition because that ensures that the interests of consumers are protected. So I guess that's the first point. I think you will find very few people that are pro-monopoly, right? And I certainly share those anti-monopoly
And if I
values.
could just quickly, like, just because Lisa Khan from the FTC just went on Jon Stewart a few months ago, I think that's her name. She's the whatever. People know what I'm talking about. The head person at FTC, and they were talking about monopolies. And just if I could, really quick, it seems like the issue isn't even with, especially with Florida's, it's not monopoly, it's an oligopoly, like in all of our fucking industries.
Yeah,
Um, I have nothing else to say other than that. I'm just saying, like,
totally.
I get caught up in words, right? And
Yeah,
I think you are. It's not that we would disagree on that. I just wish like the public discourse on it. It seems like we're talking about monopoly as if True Leave's the only one to gain, but uh, and from my perspective, it's like if you want to be technical about the market that's being set up, it'll be True Leave, GTI, what is it, Sunburn, and 20 others or something like that. I don't even know all their names and we're not going to run through them, but it's a 20-ish, right? So
22.
not a huge market and maybe maybe more licenses, but that again, that's through the legislature, which they don't do anything.
Yeah,
Um,
let's talk about that. So first, right? I think it's kind of as you were talking about, Cole, right? It's kind of a semantic game. Is a monopoly? Is an oligopoly, right?
sure.
And it's hard to sort of draw that line. But I mean, on this general conversation, like, first, I think there's a good, you can kind of rebut the claim that it's a monopoly, right? Like there are 22 different licensees in Florida, right? And obviously, True Leave is the biggest player. But as we commonly use that term, I think it's a little misleading to characterize this as a monopoly. But even if we did, right? The argument is like, look, Amendment 3 is bad because it does not include new licenses. It does not mandate new license
Right.
expansion. Right now, again, as we've just discussed, if Amendment 3 said, let's legalize weed and you must issue a bunch of new licenses, then it would not have passed the single subject rule. So again, I think no matter your position on Amendment 3, it is really hard to dispute the basic fact that this initiative would not be on the ballot, right? If it had mandated new licenses. So
Yeah.
that's the next. Now, a few more things that I think are really important, right, to consider here. The initiative does say we can't mandate this, but the legislature, right, it does explicitly say the legislature has the right to issue new licenses, right? And again, that's the only way this initiative could have been written, right? So it says like they couldn't have been written in a way to mandate it, but it does kind of make a nod towards the legislature to issue new licenses. Now, to your point, Cole, right? A skeptic might hear that and be like, yeah, dude, but the legislature is not going to do anything, right? So that's all just kind of like noise. Now let's think about this, right? DeSantis, for example, right, has been making the claim that this is a cartel and this is monopolistic. But here's what we also know, and this is just a fact, right? Florida had another licensing round a year ago, right, where they planned to issue 24 more licenses, right? So right now they have 22 licenses, and then they had a licensing round like a year ago, whose results were supposed to be out by now, in which they would issue, they would basically double or more than double the market, right? Now, Ron DeSantis has been blocking those licenses from being issued. And so just to be clear, right? If Ron DeSantis's interest is creating a competitive market, is in broadening competition, right? It is hard to view that as sincere when he is in practice, right, kind of blocking those licenses. So again, just on the sincerity of his comments, if he is actually concerned about making this a more competitive market, well, that doesn't really hold up to snuff because he is blocking the issuance of those licenses. Now,
Yeah.
number two, right?
Yeah.
In delaying those licenses from being issued, he is bankrupting those operators, right? Those operators have been sitting on assets for a year. So by delaying that process, he is ensuring that only the most well-capitalized actors that can sustain that years-long delay will be able to open their businesses whenever they're issued. So again, this is just saying when it comes to Ron DeSantis himself, and we can talk about other folks in the cannabis community, there's no way to defend his comments because he, right, is blocking more licenses from being issued. I would also say if there are folks out there who are criticizing, the initiative for not issuing more license, if they just happen to be part of that coalition, right, that donated $5 million to Ron DeSantis, like I bet you could get a hold of him, right? Or I bet you could at least get a hold of James, Altmaier, his chief of staff. And so I think it would be a lot more credible if someone, if a hemp operator were to say, I'm opposed to Amendment 3, but I'm supporting Ron DeSantis. And I called up Ron DeSantis with the $500,000 check I wrote to him, right? And I had a conversation with him about the need to issue more licenses. Presumably, if you were motivated by a desire for a more competitive market, like I would love to see the receipts, right, in which you were advocating for that. So that's all a way of saying there's one person, right, that has the power to create a more competitive market in Florida. And right now, that person is Ron DeSantis, who is making these charges that it's a monopoly. So that's what I would say. The other thing that I would say, and again, these are just objective facts, Ron DeSantis last year raised the licensing fee for Florida cannabis operators from $60,000 to $1 million. Now, just think about that. He raised the fee from $60,000 to more than $1 million by more than 20x, right? If this was someone who was really genuinely concerned with allowing ordinary people to participate in this market, it's hard to square that with his raising of the license fees. Again, this does the exact same thing. It ensures that only the most well-capitalized actors, right, can participate in this market. And one other thing I'll say, right, is that those are the ways in which I think DeSantis, right, is being insincere. And again, right, I would say if you're one of those people that is currently allied with Ron DeSantis, if you've given him hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight this initiative, I bet you could get him on the phone, right? And I think it would be more credible for you to say, hey, I got DeSantis on the phone and we share this interest in creating a more competitive market, and he isn't doing anything. But the final thing I'll say is there's this suggestion that the adult use market would sort of codify a monopoly. But I'm interested in your take on this, Cole. I think it's just the opposite. Like adult use will ultimately create a more competitive market, right? Adult use is what will make license expansion possible. Now, how do we know this? Well, there are already supporters of Amendment 3 that have introduced bills, right, to increase the number of licenses if Amendment 3 passes, right? So Carlos Guillermo Smith, who's a state senator in Florida and a big champion of Amendment 3, has explicitly, committed to introducing license expansion, when Amendment 3 passes. And so I
What
predict,
kind though? Like, is it open licensing?
I don't know. I don't
I
know
didn't
the
know
details.
if like because I know some people have also promised like to do. I might be wrong on this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like some people have like said, we'll do trailer bill for home grow or something like that. But I didn't know like if there's any talk about like new licenses, because I mean, honestly, I agree with you that it's not a monopoly. Like there was a lawsuit in Illinois. People describe Illinois as a monopoly, and I just know a few economists from the University of Illinois to be nerdy enough to be like, actually, it's an oligopoly. And I mean, it is an oligopoly. Like at least the way, like, let me just put it this way. How many people before 2016, or when did you say medical marijuana was passed in 2016? How many people do you think were selling weed in Florida?
I probably a lot illegally. Yeah, probably a ton. Yeah.
Yeah, more than 40, right? Or,
Oh, yeah, without question. Yeah.
that's my thing. It's like I agree with you actually that Ron DeSantis is speaking out of both sides of his mouth. Like, I don't think he actually wants an open cannabis economy by any means. Again, like this idea that he's a home grow proponent or any of these things. I think he's just trying to defeat Amendment 3. And many people have been saying that it's also an effort to like down ballot defeat Amendment 4 or something. But again, that's a different topic. Um, I don't know. I think it is important to acknowledge that this is like a Florida is widely acknowledged as like one of the premier limited license markets in the country, which is like is an oligopoly. It's like why those it's like the basically the MO of all of those companies like Curaleaf, GTI, they all say like we look for limited supply markets, you know, they do not like open competition markets, you know what I mean? And so when you have people like that at the table, I just and they are the ones that can pass legislation. Again, this isn't a reason not to vote for Amendment 3. It just makes me less hopeful that you're gonna see like it just because like I thought that was gonna be the case in Illinois, but again, everybody just has become apathetic. Like you just buy weed in the dispensary now, man. Meanwhile, though, the arrests continue in Illinois for things due to cannabis odor. Like they addressed the issue of burnt odor today, but raw cannabis is still, they noted, and this isn't being reported yet. I actually hope to speak to some reporters later today. Raw cannabis is still a decision they have to make. So for right now, you can still get busted for buying weed from a dispensary if the cop can smell it. Anyways, though, I think we're on the same page. I just wanted to like kind of like not even I just wanted to acknowledge since you were dropping some facts like yes, it's not a monopoly. I agree with you on that. It's a lot closer to an oligopoly. And that's why when he uses the word cartel, it's like I think like if you look up oligopoly, like the term cartel is actually usually used in the context of I can't say the word. Those types of markets. So,
And yeah,
um
let's be clear, right? I'm not denying that Florida is a limited license market. My ideal market is
sure.
a market like Michigan, for example, right? Or a
Right.
market like Colorado or a market like New Mexico, right? Where there are thousands of different operators out there, right? But I think the question, right, is not is Florida's market better than Michigan's? I think the question is how do we broaden access to Florida's market, right? And I think the facts clearly state that there is
Yeah.
legislative supported effort, right, to issue these 24 licenses that DeSantis is kind of sitting on, and that many people who claim to want a more open market, they don't seem to be raising that issue at all. And I think the other thing to note is like there is legislation to increase the number of licenses. Now, to your point, does that have specifics around it? I don't know those specifics,
Yeah.
but there's no world in which those licenses are going to expand, but an adult use world, right? And I
I wasn't disagreeing with any of those things. I was only pushing back on the notion that you were saying like this adult use, it's going to create a competitive market. And I'm like, I get what you're saying. Like it's going to open up a cannabis market that's pretty, there's a lot of stores and stuff, and there's a lot of people in Florida. I get what you're saying. But like I was just trying to point out like the low number of participants, and it sounds like we're not disagreeing on that. Like you know what I mean? And it sounds like we agree. Obviously, there's better markets than others. So I wasn't really trying to make it, like a debate on that point. I was just trying to like kind of push back on the notion that like because it almost made it sound like something was going to be different. It might be different because of some of these legislation that has been proposed, but who knows?
Totally. Yeah. The point I'm making is that it would make it a more competitive market. And I mean that even from a brand perspective. I mean, think about this. Florida does not have a ton of great cannabis brands right now by virtue of its vertically integrated structure. That's why these operators are partnering with brands in other states because they recognize in an adult use world, they're going to have more SKUs out there. Right. And so in a world where Florida goes adult use, there are people like my friend Ted Liddy, right, who runs Alien Labs, a guy who grew up in Redding, California. And I don't know if you're from California, Redding is not the Hollywood Hills, right? In Redding, the only two ways you can make a living, make a decent living, is if you sell weed illegally or if you're a firefighter, right? So this guy
Hmm.
grew up dirt poor, right, and is now partnered with Trulieve to bring this amazing product, Alien Labs, to Florida. I'm not trying to deny that Trulieve would be a huge beneficiary of Florida turning adult use. But the notion that all of this money is just kind of going into Trulieve's pocket or going into Kim Rivers' pocket, I mean, it makes for a compelling sort of rallying cry, but that's just not true, right? There are hundreds of different brands, right, that will be able to avail themselves of this massive market that will get a piece of the pie economically, right, in an adult use world. So I guess if I were to distill these points down, again, it's not sort of to deny that Florida has a very limited license structure, that there were more than 40 people selling weed in Florida prior to 2016, but it's more to say, here's where we are today, right? And if our interest sincerely is in broadening access to this market, what enables that? And I would contend that the facts suggest that an adult use world enables that. And I would also contend that some of the critics of Amendment 3, their credibility is shot because they are literally thwarting the license expansion that they claim to care about.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
to your point, just really quick, just to give you a little uh, like if I go to Florida today, even though I have my medical card in Illinois, like I don't have any reciprocity. If I go to Florida and you guys pass Amendment 3, I will be able to have a possession limit of 3 ounces, and I could go to a store as a non-resident. I'm just saying, like benefits as a non-resident. We could debate benefits residents don't get like we've touched on homegrown and stuff like that, but like non-residents benefit from these policies too. So I just kind of making that point because there's a lot of transplants in Florida, people coming in and out and visiting and such. And I didn't really think about that until, we led with, oh, no reciprocity. And I was like, shit, I'm kind of just fucked in Florida right now. So that would be a change. Anyways,
yeah,
though, sorry, small point. It was a light bulb that went off.
no, totally. No, I appreciate that. And maybe the last point on monopolies, and then we can quickly touch on home grow. Although we've talked about it a decent amount, but just a couple
Yeah.
comments. But on the monopoly thing, I think my question to folks is, and again, right, I don't think any of us like monopolies. I want to be able to go to the state of Florida and to go to 800 different dispensaries owned by 200 different people with 5,000 different brands. That's the world I
Right.
want to live in. I'm with you, right? But I guess my question for folks who say this is a monopoly, so vote against it, is how far does that logic extend, right? So in the state of Florida, Publix, the supermarket, has like 45% of the market share. I mean, would you say we should ban all grocery stores until we can create a more economically competitive market? I mean, it's a
Well,
reasonable.
that's like my favorite argument to use against limited licensing. Not that we're debating that right now, but like just exactly that. Like these big superstores can exist, and then I've got like a small family-owned meat and deli down the road, and they don't care about Walmart because they sell better meat than Walmart. And But to your point, like there's nothing stopping them from opening the door, and that's what I fucking hate about the cannabis business in almost every state. It's like if you actually want to stop the criminalization of cannabis and like people actually pushing unregulated products, like you have to make them want to participate in your legal market. Give them an opportunity and make them want to. Like I feel like in Michigan, the reason people don't sell hemp or even really do shit black market is because there's just a easy legal way to participate. So it's like, why not pay the license fee and just fucking legally participate, you know?
Totally. I mean, first of all, I totally agree with that on Michigan, right? And hemp, just given how democratic that market is.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Michigan market isn't perfect, but I think you can make the case, right, that it fills, consumers get access conveniently. I mean, again, as a
Yeah.
consumer, that's the world I want to live in, where
Hell
I
yeah.
can perfectly easily get access to legal product. So yes, for sure, even though it's not perfect. But the point I was making with the Publix analogy is sort of like, again, if you're going to make the argument that we should ban an activity, right, because the purveyors of that good are too concentrated. And I get that, right? Like I wish I was as rich as the folks who like ran Trulieve. I get it. I'm with you there, right? But I guess my question is, and I think it's a reasonable question if this position wants to be taken seriously, is how far does that logic extend? And my question to you or to anyone is, would it be okay to just close all the grocery stores in Florida because Publix has a dominant position? Are we okay banning consumer access to what we consider to be an essential good because the economic purveyors of that good are not to our liking? And I get that's kind of an extreme example, but I do think it's a reasonable question. And
Yeah.
the other, I think, reasonable question to be asked, right, is again, like I'm sympathetic to a lot of these concerns that Amendment 3 is not perfect. But I guess my question would be, if you're against Amendment 3, wouldn't you also be against legalization in Arizona, right? Because Curaleaf has 20 of the 170 licenses. Wouldn't you also be against the measure in Missouri because Good Day Farm has 20 of the
Right.
200 dispensaries? Wouldn't you also be against the medical program in Virginia because it carves it up into 5 health service areas, right? Wouldn't you also be
That's the thing. I just wish this discussion wasn't so like for and against. I wish it was like more. I feel like I have one of the and I think this is why you reached out to me. I'm sorry I just cut you off because I definitely did, but I feel like I have one of the more reasonable takes where I'm just like, vote on it. It's a step on the right direction. Like, get what you can, take the win while you can get it. We'll get to hemp. That's kind of how I look at hemp. But like, you know, and I don't know. I think it's a step in the right direction. I've just been trying to point out, the things we got to work on after that. You know,
Totally. I
I
think
don't
you
mean to
said
cut
it
off your
well.
point, but yeah,
No,
I
no,
just wish that
no,
that wasn't the conversation that I know that it's not the what we're having, but most people, like you said when you reached out to me, that's the conversation they're having. Why you vote for or why you vote for against, and it's like, why don't we like take a step in the right direction? And why can't it be yes and
totally.
you know?
I think that's the crux of it, right? And
Oh
I
shit,
think
I
you
think I just made the new Twitter mantra for
and
free for three. Yes and.
yes, and right. I like it. I
Oh
like it.
God.
I
They're
mean,
gonna
Cole, you said it well, Cole. I mean, the way I think about it is you can be skeptical of corporate power, right? You can be
Mhm.
skeptical of monopolies. You can recognize the imperfections within the system, right? And still believe that, that moving forward here is the best way to get to where we want to get, right? And again, the reason I'm kind of posing these questions, right, about like, are you against, do you want to ban grocery stores? Are you against all these other, like, I think you could criticize Ohio, Virginia, Arkansas. I mean, you could criticize most programs utilizing this logic. And so I guess the question is, are we okay forestalling, right? All of this progress, right? Because we know that when we legalize cannabis, we take a huge step towards normalizing it, which says nothing of the fact that any federal progress is downstream of the state progress. Are we okay, right? Are 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 we okay forestalling all of that progress, right? And so I guess just to kind of wrap that up is it's it's um it's not unreasonable to think about what the logical consequences of that position are. And I think if you are prepared to fervently, like, say you're against Amendment 3 in Florida, you should also be prepared publicly to say, and I reject legalization in Arizona, and I reject legalization in Missouri, and I reject legalization in Ohio, and I reject the Virginia medical program. Oh, and by the way, I reject the Florida 2016 medical initiative, right? Because it was issued in a limited license way. And I think those 900,000 people that are now registered patients, well, they're getting access through a flawed program. And so that's not to minimize the imperfections that exist in this program, but it's just to say, if you're going to take that position, I think you have to take responsibility for the logical consequences of that position,
and
which
I
is,
yeah,
right? Like,
I was
hey,
gonna say I am that person. I feel like that's the role I feel like I'm playing right now. Like I have been pointing out, and that maybe I don't mean to make a hard switch to hemp, but that's kind of my foundation and my point against hemp, or my point for hemp rather, is that it's not that it's perfect, but all those little things. Yes, I'm absolutely critical of all of our limited license state, of Ohio, of, Arizona. Um, there are more, that I'm critical. Las Vegas, that one sucks. I'm critical of it. Is it cool that you can do it? Is it a step in the right direction? Absolutely. I'm not so radical that I'm not going to give the credit where credit is due, but I do feel the role I am playing is exactly what you just described. Maybe like less. I try to be a little bit like humble, try to be like soft about it if you can't tell, but I absolutely like do believe we've not gone far enough. And that's, again, I'm not, we can, if you have more points on Amendment 3, we can, but that's kind of the foundation. I'm setting the foundation for why I love hemp, because I feel like it's decimated a lot of these nanny state regulations that we have, whether it be, these are the nanny state ones, possession limits, dosage caps, purchase limits, things like that. Or the idea that it is an open market in most states where it's easy to get a hemp license. I asked the Illinois Department of Agriculture hemp regulator, and he said, Cole, if you would have paid me this morning, you'd be walking out with one this afternoon. And it's like, fuck yeah, brother.
totally.
So that again, that's the foundation. We can get to it. Did you have more points on
No,
Amendment
I
3?
let's get to hemp. Maybe the last thing I'll say, right, on this Amendment 3
Sure.
discussion. I think there's a difference between your position, which we'll describe as the yes and position, which is yes, these initiatives, are none of them are perfect, but they represent a step forward, and now more progress needs to be made. There's a difference between that position and the let's reject, let's reject something that's imperfect. And again, I get it, right? Like I think that's a reasonable position. But I do think that means you have to own rejecting almost all the progress we've made in cannabis. I do think that means you have to own setting up a, a market that is economically democratic is more important to me than folks not getting arrested, for example, right? Like all policy decisions are weighing different criteria. And a lot of times the debate is sort of like, well, I can criticize this measure without kind of taking responsibility for what the broader implications are there. But
Yeah.
I think we kind of talked this one to death, and I think your perspective was really, really helpful here as we were just kind of vibing on this.
Yeah,
So thank you.
thank you again for coming on, dude. And do you, in the spirit of what you just said, having to balance licensing in an open market with the complete decriminalization, like again, just setting the foundation for hemp. I know that you could accurately argue that, there's like a case in Georgia where a guy was smoking a THCA, like that kind of that situation I laid out earlier, hypothetically, that actually happened. I don't know if people remember the viral video, but a guy was like smoking a THCA joint with his like girlfriend or something. Cop came over, super hostile, threw him on the ground. And he's like, bro, I just bought this from a fucking store. And he's getting violently accosted in this free country of ours. And so look, I'm acknowledging that again, there's some discretion involved and maybe some ignorance about what the law is, but and I know that this debate about hemp is about interpretation, but it's interesting how like or at least it was about interpretation. People used to say like or sorry, intent, I mean to say. People used to say, and I actually kind of agree with this like thesis, like Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump did not intend to legalize weed at a federal level. I am not the person trying to say that happened, but I think we would both be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that like Mitch McConnell didn't sit down and write the fucking 2018 Farm Bill. So
Yeah.
I feel like, and I had this debate with a lawyer on the show recently. I feel like what happened was somebody was in the room and they knew what the language meant because they are the ones that wrote it, not the legislators. And they're like, hey, if everybody just shuts the fuck up, we can do this. Like, because they don't know what they're legislating. And so the lawyer immediately jumped on me that I had on and said, well, Cole, that's you admitting that it's a loophole. And I said, no, that's me saying that our lawmakers are not reading the legislation. The language is clear. In 2014, it was the Industrial Farm Bill. It was pretty narrow what you could do with hemp. I meant to say 2018, 2014 Industrial Hemp Act. In 2018, they dropped that term industrial. As you know, they added a host of salts and isomers that I don't know. When I read them, it's like I've consumed them before. So it's like when people say the intent wasn't to make consumables, it's like, again, I think somebody fucking just knew what they were doing and they were slick with the language because cannabis itself doesn't always produce a high level of delta 9 THC. And you can testing's a fucking joke right now. It is. I mean, I'm just gonna say it. I'm not gonna even like. I was gonna be like, try to be reasonable. It's a fucking joke. It's a good start. I will again say yes. It's a step in the right direction, but it's crazy. Like third party testing in most industries is laughed at. Um. Anyways, so we've kind of established my foundation for hemp. Like I think the debate about intent is besides the fact if they didn't intend it, they've had a lot of time to make it clear and they haven't.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And so again, my whole thing is the reason I love it, there are problems. There are problems with it, and I'll give you the space here because I know I've been saying a lot, but I want to pitch it over to you by saying that because you kind of get where I'm coming from. I feel like it's decimated a lot of the like things that I think are stupid that we have to deal with. Like for example, at my mini doc the other day, so I drink these River Bluff Punch Pops. They got 50 milligrams of THC in them, and they sponsor the show too.
Nice.
So they sent a bunch of drinks to the mini doc, sent a fucking shit ton of drinks through the mail to this place that I was showing my mini doc in. And like no dispensary could ever do that for me. They also happen to have a cannabis license. I will say they have a social equity cannabis license. They're kind of like, one of those people that it's becoming more of a usual thing now, with big players jumping in and such, doing both cannabis and hemp. But anyways, you get my point that it just kind of like it feels like it's treated more like alcohol
Totally.
Hemp is more like alcohol than marijuana is, as we start with using those terms. So we've established that it seems like it addresses the criminalization issue, minus people not understanding the law, which is a big fucking problem. We can't just gloss over that. And the last thing I'll say is it doesn't, and this is the point that you kind of led with that we segued to, you don't even have to make that compromise of, because it's just fucking treated like a commodity. You just get a license. And that's why I love it. And I don't understand. I'm not saying it couldn't be better. I'm not saying we let's subject it to cannabis testing, state testing if you want to do that. But like to just shut it down is shooting ourselves in the foot, in my opinion. What say you?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I agree with so much of what you said there. And I'm going to address each of those points, I think individually. I think before I do that, just as a high level, and I think this is applicable to our entire conversation here, right? What I've noticed is I think the political divisions in the cannabis industry in a lot of ways mirror the divisions in the United States at large, right? And I just want to talk about that for a second. What concerns me about the cannabis industry, just like this country, is that we are dividing ourselves into smaller and smaller tribes, right? At the encouragement of the most strident voices within those tribes, right? And those tribes claim that their tribe represents everything that is true and that is just, and everyone who is outside of that tribe, right? It kind of is a scoundrel and is kind of ignoring the shared values that we all have. I think almost all of us, or all of us in this hemp, cannabis, marijuana space, believe in plant medicine, got into this because we saw an overbearing criminal justice system and we wanted to right that. And so even though we're engaged in this like kind of civil war conflict, we have a ton in common. And again, I see that happening in the country at large, right? I mean, I know in this country we think we're so divided, but as someone who has probably spent more time in the third world and in the rest of the world than a lot of Americans, I promise you we have so much in common, right? Like we have more in common than we know. And if you go to the rest of the world and see how other people live and what their values are, you will recognize how much we have in common in this country. And that's why it's so disheartening to see these divisions take shape. And the same is true in the context of hemp, cannabis, and marijuana. And I'll just say, just like in this country, when we fight, right? I know
It
we have our
feels like a psyop. That's all. I'm sorry.
totally,
It just really feels like
totally.
a psyop because it's so arbitrary.
I think that's the perfect term for it, right? And in the same way that in this country, our division is being cheered on by other actors in the world, like China and Russia and Iran could not be more happy that we continue to fight one another. The same thing is true in this space, right? That we continue to fight one another, and other economic interests could not be happier, right? Or like, prohibitionist politicians, right, are so happy that we're so divided, right? And that we can't coalesce our efforts. And so I guess that would be the meta comment I would make, right? Suppose you're listening to this and suppose like you didn't agree with some of the things I said on Amendment 3. Like that's fine. That's the purpose of this conversation. And I think that for the most part, we have to assume some level of good faith unless it's proven otherwise. And what I know to be true is if we identify these other people in our little niche as our biggest enemies, we are missing the forest for the trees here, and it will only be to our own detriment. And so that was part of the reason I wanted to come on and have this conversation, because the discourse you see on social media and otherwise, again, I think encourages the most strident voices, right, in these tribes. And I think that's really problematic. And a lot of those folks, like, they have an economic interest in division in the same way that a lot of politicians in this country have an electoral interest in dividing this country. So do, right, the people that say the most insane things, right, on the internet. So that's a meta comment. Another comment I'll make is about this idea of like a loophole or not. It's strange that this has captured so much of the debate. I think the simplest way I can put it is like, look, the plain language, right? And I, as we'll discuss before, like I have some concerns about the way that hemp is developed in this country, but it seems to me that the language of the Farm Bill as written, right, is pretty clear. Now, you can make the argument that the authors or the people, in cahoots with the authors did not intend these things, but those are kind of two separate arguments, right? Like one is a literal like method of legal interpretation in which you focus on literal meanings that are in the text, and the other focuses on legislative intent. And so I think this debate about a loophole just kind of misses. There are two different ways, right, to read statutes, and especially in our current judiciary, the literal interpretation tends to take precedence. So we could continue arguing back and forth about a loophole, but I think the simplest way to put it is like, yeah, this has evolved in ways that a lot of the people passing the bill didn't intend. At the same time, the language of the bill is really pretty clear, right? Even if you disagree with it, and that's generally how we interpret laws. So that's the comment on that. A couple more comments I'll make, and then I'll pause in a second. I think regardless of where we come to this from, like protecting public health should be our number one priority. And I guess a different way of putting this is we should all be capable of admitting that sometimes our economic self-interest, no matter how we're situated here, doesn't line up with public health. A lot of times people conflate the positions. They're like, oh, this is the right thing to do, but it also is conveniently the thing that is in my economic interest. Like we should be adult enough to say, X is in my economic interest. Like I'm willing to surface the fact that there are some conflicting economic interests here. And then separate from that is the public health and public policy kind of question here. What I'm kind of thinking about here is, that famous quote from Upton Sinclair, the author that wrote The Jungle. He famously said, what is it? It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it, right? That famous quote. And I think that's really applicable in the context of cannabis. So we should
Yeah.
surface the fact that we are all blinded by our economic interests here. And we need to be honest about that fact as we engage in this conversation. Um, and then as it comes to the public health debate, look, like I'm not a chemist, right? I think you've had people on this show before, and you probably more than I can speak intelligently about synthetic cannabinoids and their risks, right? I try my best to listen to scientific voices in this process, but I got like a C in high school chemistry, right? Like I'm not the guy who's going to be able to draw the line about where things are safe, right? That's not me. I'm trying to do my best to educate myself on these really new like cannabinoids and processes. I'm not that guy. So I can't claim to speak with any authority here. All I can say is, at least based on my semi-educated understanding in this unregulated state of the hemp market, there are products out there, right, that seem unsafe and not properly regulated. Again, I'm not the person who can opine on, what the right synthetic process is and what is safe and what isn't. But I think that, the world in which we're living in is that there are easily available products that could damage public health. And obviously, there's tons of good actors in the hemp space, but there are bad actors in the hemp space too. And I think as we try to move forward, and again, I'm not saying I have the solution, but as we try to move forward, we should, remind ourselves of the fact that not only is protecting public health our moral obligation, but the best way we unravel this plant medicine movement, the way that we generate opposition to it, is by having those concerns manifest themselves. So if we care about this progression, we have to be very thoughtful about how we move things forward. Just to use a kind of a crude analogy, California was one of the first states to really embrace the criminal justice reform movement, something that I support deeply. Again, right? Like I've been doing criminal justice work since I was 17. I worked for Charles Ogletree, the first person to advance a reparations claim through the United States court system. Like I'm down for the cause, right? But the way in which we've implemented it in California has drawn a lot of backlash, right? Because it's been implemented very poorly. And that's why this November, there's going to be an initiative, Prop 36, that reinstitutes all of these harsh drug crimes. So I guess the point is, if we want to move in the right direction, we have to be thoughtful about how we move forward and know that we're dealing with the fickle public that is totally prepared to put us back in Pandora's box, right? If we don't act appropriately. But to your point, what you just said, Cole, is like it's hard for the cannabis space to speak with the moral authority that I just spoke with when in our own testing regimes, we're allowing faulty product into the system, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
from the state of California. There has been a lot of literature on our testing system and on the fact that the safe, tested, and legal product allegedly coming through our licensed operators in many cases is not that. So that's a way of saying like the cannabis community needs to get its own house in order, right? Before we will have moral authority to identify other products as potentially unsafe.
Yeah, same. Just really quick, same with Illinois, and I'll link for listeners an podcast I did with the Chicago Sun Times. They'll tell you about an investigation they did into Illinois cannabis testing, and the reason I just wanted to make this point is because we're widely hailed as the most strict cannabis testing regime in the state of Illinois. And if you look at the results that the Chicago Sun Times found, just check them out.
Totally.
And if I wanted to give you more space, it sounded like you were
Totally.
about to segue. So
Yeah, I mean, I'll say maybe a few more things, and then
sure.
obviously interrupt me anytime. again, like I'm not the guy to identify where that line is drawn, which processes are okay. That's for smarter scientific people to opine on. But I guess just the larger meta comment is we have to be very thoughtful about public health, and we jeopardize this movement, right? By jeopardizing public health, whether it's on the cannabis or the hemp side. And then maybe my other kind of quasi-political comment, right, is like you were saying, Cole, hey, like banning things is not the right way forward, right? That's not going to
Right.
work. What I would say is this, and I'll give you an analogy from my prior career history, right? What I'll say is, the hemp industry's strategy of trying to like delay revisions to the farm bill, whether you agree with it or not, it is tactically sound. Now, what I kind of mean by that is like, and look, I'm kind of a skeptic. There's some people who think that in the lame duck session, the farm bill is going to be revised and the loophole, quote unquote, will be closed, right? Um, I'm a little skeptical of that, just given just federal intransigence. But I
Right.
guess what I'm saying is, when I was working at Airbnb, right, we knew that if we could delay regulation, right, longer, if we could get more consumers, right, to opt into the system, if more tax revenue was generated as a result of this, right, if more businesses were dependent upon this new economy that was still illegal, right, we knew that we would become embedded in the social fabric, and it would be really difficult, right, for the government to get rid of us. And so again, agree or disagree with the quote unquote hemp lobby. I think it is a tactically and strategically sound move. And I think this is intentional
I
to
was
delay
yeah. I was
possible
about to
because
say you probably have. I was about to bring up the fact literally that you mentioned you were an Airbnb, and I was like, that's kind of people call hemp an industry disruptor, like Airbnb for hotels.
totally. I mean, I feel like I'm living the same experience, right? You have this
Yeah.
more established incumbent actor, right? Which is the hotels, but kind of this renegade startup by virtue of having lower regulatory burdens is able to avail itself of all of this wealth and compete with this more established incumbent actor, right? So it's a perfect analogy, and I think it cuts both ways, right? So in the same way, like when I negotiated the first tax agreement for Airbnb in LA, right? I knew that within a year we would be generating 50, 60, 70 million dollars in Airbnb taxes for the city of Los Angeles. And that would forestall the efforts to try and ban Airbnb. And that, yes, there were bad actors there, but that would give sort of, and I think this is the way the hemp industry should be looking at it, that would give the hemp industry the ammo and then the self-awareness to weed out the bad actors and to establish a place like within this like newly regulated economy, to go from an unregulated to a regulated economy, to get rid of the people that were using Airbnbs to do sort of like shady or unsafe things, but to retain like kind of its benefits as you were articulating. So I think that analogy holds true. But the other piece of that I will highlight is again, going back to Airbnb, in some instances, we took it too far and should have been thoughtful about self-regulation. Now, what I mean by that is, there's long been a law called the Communications Decency Act, right? Or known as the CDA. Now, Section 230 of the CDA, right, basically, and this is a law passed in the late 90s when Bill Clinton was president, immunizes internet platforms for illegal activity that is done by third parties on those platforms. It was basically a way of facilitating the growth of the internet in the late 90s, where they said, hey, dude, like if you got a website and like someone else uses that website to do illegal stuff, like it's not on you, you just create that platform. And so that's what Airbnb and Facebook and all of these other internet platforms, that's what they adhered to for many years. They're like, hey, dude, like if you're going to try and pass this Airbnb regulation, we're going to sue you, right, in court, and we will invalidate those laws based on the Communications Decency Act, which prohibits internet platforms from being liable for that illicit activity. Now, that worked for a while, but then at a certain point, the public policy interest in policing illicit activity on these platforms led to a evolved form of judicial interpretation. And, I will say, it would have been more prudent, although Airbnb was trying to defend its business, at some point to acknowledge that this, in the same way that the Farm Bill is being used as an ironclad defense against regulation, at some point that's going to run out, right? At some point, the public, especially if negative safety incidents occur. And so I think the smart thing, and I think this is true both in Florida and across the country, the smart thing for good hemp operators to do is to recognize that they may adopt a strategy of delay in order to forestall regulation, right? And that they probably will be able to do that given how dysfunctional our political culture is. And again, whether you agree or disagree with them, they'll be able to amass more economic might to fight that battle. but that the idea of, kind of keeping regulation at an arm's length forever is ultimately not in the interest of those hemp operators. And to give you a really specific example, although Airbnb is now a really successful company, Airbnb is now banned in New York. You cannot go to the city of New York. You can't go to New York City and hardly get a single Airbnb today, despite the fact that it was a thriving business for 6 or 7 years, because they fucked around a little bit too long and then they found out, right? And I would bet that a couple of years ago, if they pivoted a little bit, and again, it's been 7 years since I worked there, so I can't sort of pretend to be involved in the day to day. I guess the point is there was a moment at which self-regulation was required. There needed to be some introspection about good actors and bad actors, and making that distinction. And again, we could spend hours debating where that line is drawn. And as I just
Sure.
mentioned, I'm not smart enough to draw that line for you. I just don't understand chemistry enough. But I do
Yeah.
know that if these industries are going to coexist and survive in the way that hotels and Airbnbs now to some extent do coexist and survive, there's going to have to be some policing of that activity, and you cannot hide behind a legal defense for too long. And so
Yeah.
there's more I could say. I think there's all these interesting subcategories, like beverages, for example, I think are really interesting, but that's sort of a meta policy point.
Yeah. So obviously some of these products would be hard to do because there is this interstate commerce idea, but like, I don't know. I feel like the issue is simple. If you can pass a state test, you can sell your product on the market. And like one of the things you said is like, I actually know a good number of, including these people that I'm drinking a drink of, River Bluff Collective. They are sponsoring legislation. I don't know. I'm not going to speak or endorse the legislation that they're maybe pushing this session. I will just say that in the past, when we've talked, they generally share the principles of yes, we'll label our product accurately. Yes, we'll test it to the same standards as your cannabis testing regime, wherever it is. We're talking Illinois, right? I've seen other similar proposals, is the point. It's this like three pillar approach of testing, labeling, and age gating. And that's it. Like that solves the problem. So I do agree with you that there is probably a lot of those people. Like just there's so much truth in what you're saying. I can feel it, like because you're talking about your lived experience in Airbnb. So obviously there are people that stand to benefit that are selling these Doritos, and I saw Fritos and like these Starburst knockoffs. Like these people would not survive under a regulatory regime that. But I guess what I'm saying is Illinois has a hemp licensing program. Florida has a hemp licensing program. And I'm curious just because you know a lot about this, and I never see people talk about this. Like I always see people talk about DeSantis's veto. I read his veto once, and I tried talking about this with the Dank Informer, and I'm just curious like what your take is. Okay, I want to acknowledge he's probably speaking out of both sides of his mouth, but I didn't know that he passed a bill, he says, to um what did he say? You can't sell it to people under 21. It prohibits the sale or distribution of products found to be mislabeled or attractive to children. So I guess my question is if they have these laws, and let's just put aside the fact that let's just say he's disingenuous because he is. Um, doesn't this fall on like the state of Florida or in the case of Illinois? Because people call them unlicensed operators and that they're not regulated. It's like, no, oftentimes these people have hemp licenses. Their regulations are just different. You know what I mean? And so I guess that's my question. Like, what's your take on that idea? Because, like, I feel like sometimes that's like a talking point. Like, again, I think there are unlicensed operators. It's those examples with the clear knockoff products because they wouldn't survive with a license because they'd be liable to a lawsuit through that legal system, whatever it is. So they're never going to survive. But a lot of times these people do have licenses and they are regulated. They're just regulated differently, you know?
Totally. I mean, here's what I would say. First, again, just going back to Airbnb and we're talking about Florida, I think we're likely to see a very state specific system emerge, right? So in the same way that Arizona and Florida, those two states, for example, they're really big on tourism. They're really big on vacation rentals. And so they have state frameworks that make it really hard for cities to interfere with the rights of people, right, to host short-term
Yeah.
rentals. Very different from other states that don't have the same economic interest in like sort of promoting
Aren't there
tourism.
places that don't like allow Uber? Like they
I,
only allow taxis?
I think those are few and far between these days.
Oh, sorry. I was going to try to give you another example, but anyways.
No, no, totally. I mean, I don't know. I think there might be some places that ban Uber, but in most places those seem
Because
available.
that's another analogy that I've heard is, taxi medallions versus Uber. I
Totally.
never thought about Airbnb and hotels. Like that's another great example to think about. But yeah.
There's a lot of analogs here, right?
Hmm.
All of these things for sure. And then, on your question, right, pulling up that veto message, I can't pretend to be an expert in like how hemp is regulated in Florida. To your point, I think there's some level of regulation. I think there are some critics that would say, hemp is not fully or properly regulated in Florida. That's what I believe to be true, but I can't, I guess I can't opine. I don't know with specificity what all of those regulations look like. But I will say, as a practical matter, right? And you were just pulling up that veto message, and I remember reading it a few months ago. I haven't read it since. But what I remember from that message is that later in the letter, he says, okay, in 2025, like I want the legislature to come back, right? And to pass a law that focuses on X, Y, and Z,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's the important thing to consider. I mean, going back to Florida, for example, if I were a hemp operator in Florida that were doing things the right way, I would recognize, and I think this is true for Florida, but also is applicable across the country, right? Like I would recognize that Ron DeSantis might be my friend in 2024, but Ron DeSantis might be trying to clamp down on me in 2025. And so tactically, right, the best way to ensure my survival, right, is to sort of opt into a set of regulatory standards that makes clear that I'm a good actor and ally with the cannabis industry within that framework. Put differently, right? I think like it would be a mistake for a lot of these hemp operators to continue to fight the cannabis industry because I think 6 months from now, they're going to be standing on more of an island when they have to contend with a force like Ron DeSantis. So I realize that's not a substantive answer to your question of like, what is the state of regulation? What might it be?
Yeah.
I guess as a tactical point, I go back to this idea that like again, in the same way that if you were a really good Airbnb host in the year like 2017 and you were making a ton of money in the semi-regulated world, but because it was semi-regulated, you were making a ton of money and you were doing all the things the right way. I think it is in your interest in ensuring the survival of your business to identify what those set of best practices are and
Yeah.
to advocate for a legal framework that allows that to stand alongside hotels rather than living in a world in which Airbnbs are banned entirely. So let me know if that kind of gets at your question, but that's
No, it
my
does because, like, honestly, what you had pointed out, I'm reading it right now. That's it, again, acknowledging that he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. That seems to be what he's setting out. He's saying, hey, I set these standards back in the day. Coming forward, these should be the standards. And it's actually kind of what I just said. Though I disagree with some of them, he fucking pretty sure I thought I saw like, yeah, like a dosing cap. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong and getting too caught up on words. Again, I think adults can figure out what, we do it with alcohol. Why can't we figure it out with cannabis? We'll figure out which doses we want. And, companies will figure out which doses sell. Let it work itself out. Anyways, retail. So he says quality control, labeling, marketing, and packaging, retail sales. But he says, that's what he wants in the future. But in the meantime, I encourage the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services to continue using its full existing authority to root out products that violate Florida law, which is whatever he said up here, which is just that it can't be sold to under 21. It can't be mislabeled or attractive to children. All processing facilities have to meet food safety and sanitation standards and provide, actually, there it is, provides a potency cap, son of a bitch. Um, I don't know what it is, but the fact that there is one at all, I get caught up in those small details. Anyways, we'll move on from that. My idea is, even if he's talking out of both sides of his mouth, he put it in paper that I encourage this department to use their full authority. I don't know what their full authority is. Maybe you don't either. And I think you actually said that. So maybe this is a moot point we're talking about. But again, my real point, and I actually hear your point, Like, look, there are issues, like you just said, with all these analogs, like Uber, Airbnb, um, Lyft, any the pet I was just talking to my friends the other day. They do like pet walking and they like love animals and make sure to walk people's pets and they're trying to do a sustainable business. Meanwhile, these people are just like gig workers. They just get like an app and they're like, "Oh, I'll fucking walk your dog." So there's problems with all these little like gig economy things and flexibilities that pop up, these market disruptors. That's I think a string that we see through all of these things. And like you say, I just hope that people like the example I've been using here where they do have 21 plus, they've got it dosed, it says it's tested. I can look at the COA. Um, they're trying to play by the rules. Like I feel like these people are they should, like you say, they should come to the table, come up with a reasonable set of standards. Hopefully they don't touch on my little triggers with potency caps and you know come to the table and just agree to operate on one set of rules and it seems like the reasonable ones do. So I don't know, man. I hope to see it. That's what I hope to see in the future is like, okay, so it's interesting because in Illinois, I've recently released articles. Not many people are talking about this, and it's fine. It's not that crazy of a story, but GTI and Nature's Grace and Wellness are two companies in Illinois that have been granted the exclusive ability to grow hemp, and they only use it for extraction purposes, right? So in edibles and vapes. And I won't name which of the two cultivators, but one of the two has claimed that 40% of their products in Illinois come from this outdoor hemp, section. So it's like if it can be sold in Illinois and it can pass these standards, like again, it kind of go back to my original point. I just wish we could it seems like a simple issue. We've got these testing services set up and we actually agreed they're flawed, but it's like, hey, it's a start. Like that's what I said earlier. It's a start. So why not just let them if they can't pass the test, they can't sell the product. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that all resonates. And
But I think
I
to your point, maybe maybe I'm being too optimistic or you know,
yeah, I mean,
I don't
one
know.
thing that I want to pull on is that, like you said, Cole, like two sets of rules or play by the same sets of rules, or the term fairness is thrown out a lot. I think that's worth unpacking, right? Like, how do we evaluate that fairness argument in this like hemp cannabis war?
Hmm.
Look, like, is it unfair that like, cannabis operators are subject to 280E and can't do interstate commerce like and hemp operators can? Yeah, I mean, it's hard to dispute that it's unfair. I mean, is it unfair that cannabis has on some level given cover to hemp, right? That we accept hemp in part because of the normalization that these licensed operators have facilitated? Yeah, I think that's reasonable. But I think a second question worth asking is like, do we care about fairness that much? And what I mean by that is like there's fairness when it comes to the perspective of entrepreneurs, but there are also other interests, right? Like how do we weigh that against the interests of consumers? And again, I'm not answering that question. I'm just posing it as a question. There is a world in which hemp is playing by a set of rules that is unfair, but someone could still argue. And again, I realize this is debatable, but I'm just trying to like disentangle these arguments in the various
Yeah.
constituencies here, right? Like that evaluates things through the lens of an entrepreneur, right? And it's perfectly possible that something might have been unfair to the cannabis entrepreneurs that are trailblazers, but might be in the interests of consumers. Now, someone would respond to me and say, no, hemp products are all terrible and they're unsafe, they're bad for consumers. But my point is that we kind of, in the same way that we conflate our economic self-interest and public health, we throw out this term fairness without recognizing that is kind of an entrepreneur-centric term. And that's just one constituency. As we were talking about with Florida, there's the perspective of the business operators, there's the perspective of consumers, there's the perspective of citizens that might get arrested. And so we tend to conflate all of these issues. And I think that the term like there needs to be one set of rules, like I get that. I think that is true, but we also need to think about consumers here. And then I'll also say on when it comes to one set of rules, like again, that makes sense to me, right? But I think when it becomes problematic is when that parity involves fitting hemp into broken regulatory systems, right? And I think there's no better example of that than California. Like California is a totally broken cannabis market, right? As measured by, per capita sales and anything else. And there was recently Governor Newsom's like executive order, right? Or emergency regulations kind of like banning all hemp. And on the one hand, I'm sure there are some really dangerous hemp products out there that will have been removed as a result of that order. I'm sure there are also a bunch of great products that will be removed as a result of that. I think Adam Terry from Cantrip is probably, one of the great examples of an operator who is doing things the right way, who has been caught up in that broad measure, right? So, but setting that aside, I think it becomes problematic. Like, if fairness requires us to fit hemp into these broken regulatory schemes, that will lead us nowhere, right? The solution in California, the way to obtain fairness is by lowering the burden, right, on cannabis operators, by lowering the taxes and all of these insane regulations, not trying to fit hemp into a broken
But that
regulatory.
seems like what that is. Like almost like I almost feel like cannabis needs to step a little bit to the middle and back off with the oligopolistic tendencies, and hemp needs to step in a little bit in the middle. And to your point, the testing systems aren't perfect. We've acknowledged that, but it's like a step in the right direction. You know what I mean? And then yeah, we improve.
Totally, totally. Yeah, no, I agree with
But
that.
also to your point, because you made a few other points, a step in the right direction. They step towards us. I don't mean to even say us like I'm a hemper, but I really like. You get my point on it. If you step that direction, you get the freedom from 280E. You get the freedom to ship your product interstate. So it's like you stand to benefit from. Like this is the way I wanted to pitch it to you. Like I feel like anybody. I didn't even say it to you because again, I did the same thing with the Dank Informer, and I asked this. This is really actually like when it comes to brass tacks, what really intrigued me about hemp. If you scroll all the way to the bottom of the 2018 Farm Bill, and you just look at the language, and there's all this talk about rescheduling right now. Like this is what it looks like to deschedule something. We did it in 2018, and we don't disagree on that. But I'm just the what I'm trying to say is because I know legalization adult use happened in California in 2016, and it's basically been legal since 1996 in California. But I feel like if we would have been given this option in 2005, I mean, we would not be having this discussion we're having right now. Like, and it's not that we're having it, but like the broader like at each other's throats. I think what the discussion would be if this happened in 2005 would be like, hey, people aren't always labeling this accurately. So like let's not fucking put the cat back in the bag. We legalize weed. Let's fucking make sure they label it properly. Like I hate that's what I really hate when people talk about changing the farm bill at all. It's like this is a whatever you want to call it. It's just a fucking win and you got to take it when you get it. Just like Amendment 3 would be. Like you got to recognize little wins when you might be able to get them. You know what I mean? And I wish we would look I'm not talking about we on this call, but like we as the collective cannabis community because I really do in some ways in a high conspiratorial way. I feel like somebody like knew what they were doing when they wrote in hemp and they're like, this is going to piss a lot of fucking people off because it's just arbitrary split. I mean, this is what they did. They descheduled it just using they made up some random term called hemp, you know, which I think we both would agree in the past when people were referring to hemp, it's that long fibrous plant. But they knew what they were doing, you know? And I just wish we'd take the win for what it is and try to improve it for what it needs, right? Instead of and I don't think that's what you're proposing here today, but it does seem like and I'm not trying to feed into that us versus them mentality, but it is unfortunate like a lot of the cannabis investor like talk that I've involved myself in. I actually invest in a lot of these companies, by the way, not a lot of money because I'm not a rich person, but these stocks aren't very expensive. I might buy just a few here or there and hey, maybe I'll make a buck or two. I don't know. So that's what I'd done a few years ago. Anyways, though, what do you think about that? Like, why can't we just take the win for what it's worth?
I mean, I would say progress on drug policy reform has always been incremental. Like that's what drug policy reform is. It is
Yeah.
taking win, right? I mean, let us just think about this in a broader context. Governments do not have an interest in making mind expanding like plant medicine compounds available, right? And a lot of the stigma that exists is a result of deeply entrenched economic interests. So we're fighting an uphill battle, and all progress is by definition incremental. I take your point that, in 2005 we could have done something differently and we wouldn't be here, but we are where we are today, right? And so the
Yeah.
question is, how do we move forward together? And it seems clear to me that the way that we kind of like move forward together is, well, the way that we, the internal kind of civil war that exists is not going to lead us to that desired outcome. And so, I mean, I guess I would focus on like what are the things that this conflict has taught us, right? And we've surfaced some of these already, but maybe another thing I'll surface is that this conflict, or hemp, has taught us, right, that cannabis will never reach its full potential when it is only made available in restrictive sales channels. Like you were talking earlier, like hemp is super easy to get. I can buy it anywhere. I can buy it online, right? And look, on the one hand, that is incredibly frustrating for cannabis operators because they can't avail themselves of those tools. But what we know, right? The reason why people go into these Total Wines and they buy beverages is that we know that people, like, not everyone is going to smoke weed the way you and I do, right? Like they are looking for cannabis in normal distribution channels. They find the idea of going into a dispensary very intimidating because it's a weird experience. They want to consume cannabis in form factors that are familiar to them. And so, yes, we are living in the state of this conflict, but one of the lessons that I think the cannabis industry has learned is that the restrictive sales model, which maybe was a necessity, right? The way that we had of combating this deep stigma against cannabis is sort of, even against our better intellectual judgment, was to treat it like it was plutonium, is to engage in this. I think Adam Terry, a previous guest of yours, said that this was a Faustian bargain. And I think that was a
Yeah.
really good way of putting it, right? Like we engaged in that bargain. That's what we needed, right? In order to overcome that stigma. We now see the limitations of that framework. And so the question is, right, how can we adopt at least some of the lessons that hemp has taught us about how to move plant medicine forward while acknowledging some of the regulatory limitations that could present bad outcomes, right? In the same way that, like, I decided to work at Airbnb because, I'm a little older than you, Cole, but like when I first got some money to travel, like I couldn't afford to stay in hotels, but I could stay in Airbnbs. And I was like, this is awesome. Like I can do this everywhere. I want to work for this company. I want to push policy forward. So I was stoked on it. But when I was there, I realized that even though 99.9% of use cases were legit for Airbnb, there was real harm that could be caused by a lack of regulation. And so similarly, I think it's important that folks, like that really believe in hemp to have, and I think, most are already there, but the conflict kind of obscures this common ground, to have that come to Jesus moment where you're like, okay, this is a new cool thing that we developed. Now, how do we build the right guardrails around this to make it politically defensible and ensure that it remains an option in the future in the same way that Airbnbs are an option as an alternative to hotels? So I know I keep returning to that analogy, but I
Yeah.
think it's appropriate.
I think the point that I hadn't been able to verbalize up until you just said that was that I've been trying to verbalize, and I can like put it more succinctly now, is that I just hate that there's, so like you said, there are people on the, let's call it Airbnb side of this debate that aren't going to welcome more regulation because they're better without it. And then it's just unfortunate there are people on the side of the debate of quote unquote regulation that also I feel like are making arguments in bad faith. Like I've specifically seen people like back off of like just hemp derived cannabinoids in general. There's still this idea of like you want to get it naturally derived instead of synthetically derived. But like Delta 8, for example, the University of Illinois first identified and synthesized Delta 8 in like 1942. I'm not going to sit here and say it's well researched, but I am under the impression that it's like not as dangerous as everybody was making it out to be. In fact, the first place I ever tried Delta 8 was in an Illinois dispensary. Like I've got a BioTrack label and everything. It was tested by the state. I'm not trying to stand up for Delta 8 or anything. I'm trying to make the point to keep it succinct, like a kind of short. It's unfortunate that the people that are on the side, I think they're like joining the reasonable side. They're like amongst the reasonable side or posing as the reasonable side, making bad faith arguments. Do you understand what I'm trying to say about some of the like, and now that it's interesting how the goalposts have shifted. It's like, okay, CBN's okay, CBD, CBG, that stuff's cool to have in, these products now. But skip back a few months ago, like all of those types of cannabinoids, like you call it, what do people call it? Like alphabet soup or something like that. It's like they're all cannabinoids. I remember the first time I went into a dispensary, saw all the cannabinoids. I was like, this is great. And then for like a little period there when hemp got popular, certain cannabinoids were being demonized. It's like, nah, if they're tested and regulated, I think if they can pass those state regulated tests, then they're probably okay. To
So
your point, though, you made earlier, sorry, I promised to be short, but I think you made a really good point earlier that Adam Terry made. He's more of a chemist than both of us, and there are some of these downstream chemical processes that can happen for certain like synthetic cannabinoids. I'm not going to sit here and try to defend all synthetic cannabinoids. I do think treating any substance, like you got to be really careful with drug policy. Just like zoom out from this little civil war. Like we should be very hesitant to treat, I think, any drug like a controlled substance because that act has fucked us for years now as a society. I'm not saying no regulation, but don't schedule substances. You know what I mean? Like figure out a way to regulate them. Sorry though, I went on longer than I meant to.
No, thanks for that. I mean, I'll just make a few points. One, just on the chemistry piece of this, I'll just say again, that's where it becomes harder for me to opine, right? You were talking about the
Sure.
safety of synthetic cannabinoids, where I kind of get lost in this debate and where there needs to be people smarter than me, right? Is kind of like articulating that kind of what is safe. And I try to educate myself on these things, but it's hard for me to say, well, that synthesized process is okay.
But do
And
you
that
take my point? Because I also got lost in it, like the fact that people, I'm not saying you do, but people that don't know what the hell they're talking about will demonize. Like I'll just the Dank Informer like is constantly talking about like I'm not saying he's wrong on any certain points. He said he's actually had an anecdotal experience of like actually suffering, he says, from. I'm not disputing his personal experience. I'm just saying he's not a chemist either, so like maybe people that don't know the chemistry. I'm not saying you can't research and figure things out too, but you take my point. I wasn't actually referring to him, but he pops up in my Twitter feed a lot. It's kind of like a lot of different people that don't know the chemistry and are opining anyways. And then you and I will be like, hey, I don't know. And we even try to point people that do know that tell us like that doesn't sound like a good idea. So maybe we should just fucking stay away from that, you know? Maybe we
no, for
should
sure.
stick
I
to
mean,
natural, like Adam Terry says.
it's yeah, exactly. I mean, it's really hard to evaluate all these claims, and I guess I'll just, again, it's hard for me to opine one way or another
Sure.
on particular people's claims. I guess just the very basic and unhelpful thing I'm going to say is like I want people to be safe, right? And that
Yeah.
has to be like the
Yeah.
ground zero for all of our policy. Um, but that's a larger scientific debate that is probably subject for another podcast.
But you
I'll
get like when people I hate it when, sorry to cut you off, but like Governor Newsom says it's like safety and for the children. He's like, I went into an alcohol store and I could buy these. It's like, dude,
we'll see.
like
Yeah,
when you go into Total Wine, it's like there should be, and I know we're not disagreeing. I just hate when people use public safety. That's like another example of like he's a pro cannabis person. He's signed cannabis, but he's making a bad faith argument about as if these products are maybe were some of the products he got that were like clearly copyright infringement bad, but like yeah, he had Adam Terry's products up there. It's like, bro, you have they've got child safe lids on. Like, get the hell out of there with that bad faith argument.
totally. I mean, I think we have to be able to identify when people are being
That's a
disingenuous,
better example than Dank
right? Yeah.
Informer.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's an example of someone who is being disingenuous under the guise of public health. I mean, if we're
Yeah.
talking about Newsom, let's just be clear here. What is Gavin Newsom's interest, right? In California, we have a really high cannabis tax structure, right? And this is unique in that this cannabis tax revenue goes towards specific nonprofits in California that long have had political clout, right? So it just so happens, right, that this cannabis program funds different nonprofits. It's sometimes hard to tell how they spend that money, funds different nonprofits that are allied with the Democratic Party in California. So quite frankly, cannabis tax revenue in California is a slush fund for Gavin Newsom to, pay off his political allies that perpetuates the interests of the Democratic Party, right? And that cannabis tax revenue continues to decline, right? Because we have such a broken regulatory system, and hemp is seen as the one responsible. And again, I'm just going to go back to like Airbnb, for example, in San Francisco, right? As you probably know, right? In the in the 2010s, rent started to increase precipitously for a variety of reasons as it did around the country. And Airbnb was a very convenient scapegoat for politicians, right, who said that it was contributing to the rise in these rents. And so a lot of times, politicians look to grandstand on particular issues, and so it's hard to take his action seriously. And I think it was motivated by a desire, right, to protect the tax revenue going to his favored constituencies. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's just kind of my comment on him. And I think what's interesting about what he brought up is it sort of brings beverage right into the equation, right? And there's all of these different types of hemp products. What I thought was so interesting about what he said, or hilarious, right, is even if you're skeptical of hemp products, right, inhalable hemp products, I think like the form factor of these different products that is most compelling, that has the clearest value proposition, is beverage, right? We've seen that adoption because it's such a familiar form factor. We know intuitively that it acts as a substitute for alcohol,
And to
which
Adam Terry's point, without the scale that hemp has, kind of back to one of my foundational points, without the scale that hemp allows for, there would not be this, because there just wasn't a big enough, like competitive enough market for people to like develop these drinks, R&D, Pabst
totally,
isn't it.
totally.
Anyways, sorry.
No, yeah, I think you're totally right about that, right? And as is well known, the beverage product is not fit for the dispensary sales channel, right? Beverages in this, really, we were talking about the
I didn't
limitation.
think about that. That's kind of interesting. Yeah, you don't usually chill products at a dispo.
Totally. Dude, fridges are super expensive and are huge, and they take up a ton of space, right? And that's why, what hemp, and this goes back to what I was saying before, what hemp has taught us is that yes, in fact, there is a desire for cannabis beverage products that are a form factor that is familiar to people. I think every human being that has ever existed likes some beverage of some kind, right? Which is not what we would say about smoking. And so what is unique about beverage is that it's a substitute for alcohol. And look, I enjoy a glass of wine too, but that's like one of the most destructive drugs out there, right? And so I think it both makes a mockery. And look, I think beverage products should be well regulated, to be clear, right? But it makes a mockery of his claims about public health when we know kind of in practice the practical impact of a beverage product, a hemp beverage product being in a total wine in California, is that people are probably going to drink less, right? Which reduces all of the downstream consequences of it. So on the Newsom thing specifically, it's disingenuous because his primary interest is an economic or a political one, but it's being made under the guise of public health. And it's, I think, particularly silly to do that for beverages, given that, at least in my opinion, there's the clearest public health justification for it. And then just a couple other points on beverage, right? To your point, I don't think beverage sales are taking away from dispensary sales. Like I can imagine a cannabis operator being pissed about like these inhalable hemp vapes, and so people aren't coming to my shop, right?
Or
I can see
THCA flower,
correct. That's the
Yeah.
best example, right? But these beverage products seem to serve like a different demographic. And if anything, this has been said by many people before, they help build a comfort with THC, right? With cannabinoids that could induce more consumers down the road. So I think beverage products like that, the sort of zero sum economic competition logic does not apply in the same way with beverages. And again, just saying again, they are the clearest illustration that familiar form factors and regular sales channels are the way to achieve our goal. Like I want to turn everyone in this country onto plant medicine, and that has to be part of the way that we get there. And then finally, as a practical matter, right? Just going back to what I was saying before about the Farm Bill, agree or disagree, the strategy of delay is a good one. I've seen it happen before, and eventually you're going to have to cut a deal and separate the good actors from the bad actors, right? Similarly, hemp beverages will have a very natural political ally in the alcohol industry, which has, an exponential amount of more political power than the cannabis industry. And so as a practical matter, even if for some reason you hated these beverages, which not many people seem to, like we have to recognize that in Minnesota, 20% of breweries are involved in the hemp beverage category in some way. And so the idea, as Newsom suggested, that these products can just be banned and eliminated like that, it just flies in the face of all practical reality. And is not going, that just perpetuates, I think, kind of the infighting, right? That is not in our long-term interest. So
Yeah, to your point, Illinois, there's a lot of the Craft Brewer Association, the president, I believe, or maybe he's the executive director, I can't remember, came on the show, and they lobbied against the hemp ban in Illinois, and ultimately ended up becoming a proponent of a bill that a lot of people were still referring to as a hemp ban. And I agreed with them because it would have basically said, yes, you can sell hemp, but only if you're licensed under the Cannabis Act. And what other people were proposing, like I said earlier, were like, we can sell hemp, but we'll do your tests. And they were like, nah, we're not doing that. But I think one of the best takes that I've seen, one of my favorite cannabis daily shows that I watch every once in a while, the Dale's Report.
Great show.
Anthony Verrill had a really good. I hope I'm saying his last name right. He had a really good take on this. Like if you would have asked me, I can't remember how many years ago he said, but if beverages would take off, I'd be like, nah. And dude, I totally agree with him. That's such a good take. And now I love them. I think he drinks them all the time too. And it's interesting because yeah, I never would have thought I'd be drinking cannabis, and it's honestly gotten me to the point where like I don't smoke as much and I feel like that's better, you know. Notice my sense of smell has gotten stronger as I've been blazing up today, but when I don't smoke and just drink these, like my sense of smell gets better. I can because I haven't been smoking. I've figured out that it's because like the particulate gets kind of in your nose or whatever. So anyway, it's not to, I just wanted to give a shout out to a good cannabis show and a good take on the subject. So
Totally. And just on that, first of all, Dale's Report is a great show. I
yeah,
think it's super informative. They recently were in DC doing a
yeah,
bunch of
that
interviews.
was awesome. That was
Yeah,
awesome.
they're really doing something unique in the space, and that is valuable to the community. So totally agree there. I agree with your sentiment and Anthony's sentiment on beverages. I think we looked at beverages through our lens, right? Like if we
Right.
were high cannabis consumers historically, we're like, dude, why would I want to drink a beverage? But you come to realize that not everyone is like us, right? The vast majority of people are not like us, and beverages,
I
um,
almost feel silly for never thinking of it because now when the thing I think we missed earlier when we talked about the preponderance of beverages and why it's great to go to just to like a liquor store is again some people are like they're worried about seeing somebody at a dispensary that they know. There's
yeah,
still that stigma, and if you're just at the liquor store, you can kind of throw it in your cart, bag it up, put it in a koozie when you're somewhere, and just drink on it, and nobody's gonna ask any questions, and you're getting high. Like that's the fucking appeal right there. It's
yeah,
so cool.
totally.
And we kind of glossed over it. Sorry though, I didn't mean to. You can go ahead.
No, I mean, I think that's a good point, and I think we're kind of getting towards the end here. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
one or two other points I'll say is like just on this hemp debate.
Hmm.
Um, the one thing I struggle with sometimes, right, even though, as I've described, right, there are often concerns about unregulated products, is in states that have total prohibition, right? In some instances, this is like the only safe, or legal way you can get access to cannabinoids. And so you routinely hear, like in places like Texas, for example, about how veterans, right, or people who are ailing avail themselves of these hemp products and find them to be beneficial. And so that's an interesting that's an interesting thing to consider, right? Which is to say, even if you might have concerns about some of these products and whether they're fully regulated, if you just think about all the other crap that is fed to Americans under the guise of medicine, if you think about all of the limited number of medicinal options that people have, or just the fact that they have to resort to pharmaceuticals, that I think makes things more more difficult, right? So in places that have really limited medical programs or no medical programs, or even places like New Jersey, right, where like they have a legal cannabis program, but it's so expensive that
Or
it's
if
not a
you value your Second Amendment right, technically, that's another really good. I just actually interviewed the member from the VFW. It's funny you brought up veterans. The reason they from Missouri that got raided from DHSS in Missouri. Well, they say they got raided. Apparently, Missouri PD or what DHSS disputes that. I wanted to be clear in the reporting there. Um, anyways, the draw for them with hemp is that it is federally legal by the letter of the law, and they don't have to, as he put it, and I know this is a political example, but commit a Hunter Biden crime when he buys a gun, because you're not using a Schedule One substance. He's not lying about that, is what he's saying. And if you participate, like I do, in a medical cannabis program, at a state level, or technically if you participate in an adult use market, you shouldn't purchase a firearm from an FFL. In other words, from like a store. The only way you can do that is if like Hirsch, since we know each other now, Like the only way I can buy a gun is if like you sell me a gun, and you can't buy that gun for the express purpose of giving me that gun. It has to be like a totally organic thing from what I understand, a private sale, as some people call it, the gun show loophole, right? So real, I think I just want to make this small point that if universal background checks become a thing, and we don't have any reform on cannabis, which we're going to have rescheduling, so it might change things, who knows what the future holds. But as it stands now, that would mean that like somebody like myself would no longer be able to purchase a firearm. I could still bear arms, but I would never be able to pass that federal, well, unless I lied, right? But that's a crime. So you get my point. That was an interesting draw that I feel like nobody's talking about. Like we talk about 280E, and I make the point about possession caps, but this guy made that point, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't think about the fact that a constitutional amendment, whatever you feel about that particular amendment, I mean, it is remarkable that your choice to use a legal substance precludes you from a constitutional amendment,
Yeah, from precludes you from a constitutional right. Yeah,
Or yeah,
absolutely.
right. Yeah, exactly.
100%. No, I think
So
that's, I mean, being an Indian dude from the Bay Area, I have no experience with guns, but I'm trying to think. I think we've covered most things. I can
yeah,
kind of give final thoughts, or go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, if you had final thoughts, I only had one real quick question that has nothing to do with anything we were talking about, just because I've enjoyed my conversation with you. You talked about like Airbnb in San Francisco. Is there any truth? I read an article like the Airbnb had like bought up all like, is there truth to the idea that it like destroys big towns? Like they buy up all the like popular areas, and then there's like nowhere for anybody to go type of thing.
Yeah,
Like,
I would say there's in some
I know
instances
that was a
truth.
bad question because it was
Oh,
top of the head, but
that's fair. Yeah, I think in some instances there is some truth to that. In many instances, it's exaggerated, right?
okay.
So, like by exaggerated, I mean, like in many cities across this, rents were rising, and there was long this narrative that, to your point, they bought up a bunch of places and no one has anywhere to live anymore. And the reason why it's so expensive to live in New York City is because everything's an Airbnb, right? And I think a lot of times that's like overstated. And, there are other factors, like the fact that San Francisco had such high rents is that San Francisco doesn't build any new housing because it's almost impossible to navigate that framework. So that's why rents are so expensive in San Francisco. And in many instances where, like New York City has banned Airbnb, right, for the past year, rents aren't getting any cheaper in New York City, right? So in some instances, I think that's misguided. In some instances, there's some truth to it, right? If you think about really small mountain towns, right, in Colorado, for example, like if you think about those really small towns like near Vail, right, that rely on a service economy in which workers are lower income in order to sustain themselves. When people buy up a bunch of properties and use them as Airbnbs, there's less long-term housing supply, right? And you can more credibly say you are raising the rents on those folks and kind of pushing them out. So I think there's sometimes like some truth to that. Although I think in many instances that's been exaggerated.
Yeah, and maybe even in some instances, it's just people that can't roll with changes. They're like, the kids are loud next door. It's like, buy
Totally.
a new house, grandma. Like, sorry, there's an Airbnb next door.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Exactly.
but anyways, well, hey, dude, I appreciate you taking so much time to chat with me, for reaching out. I'd love to do this again, obviously. I think that goes without saying. You're welcome anytime, and I hope everybody enjoyed this conversation. Hirsch, I hope you enjoyed your time with me this afternoon.
I did too. And can I say one final thing before?
Dude, yeah, you got the floor. Take it,
Oh,
man.
look. Well, thank you for having me. This was
Yep.
a really awesome exchange. I learned a lot. I think what I just want to say in the end is like, look, we had a really free flowing conversation. I learned some stuff, right? I considered some perspectives. I don't think, at least I don't have the answer, like the precise answer, right, to this question, right? And I think anyone whose position can be summed up in like a sentence or two, right? Like the kind of one sentence positions you see in these hysterical posts on LinkedIn, for example, right? I'm kind of skeptical of that, right? Anyone who's like, oh, it's all about liberating the plant, right? Or whatever, right? And like you're a prohibitionist if you like this was a process of establishing a discourse, right? Maybe between people who may not agree on every single thing. And that's what's essential here. I just want to go back to what I was saying before, right? Like what is happening in cannabis right now is there is an effort to break into smaller and smaller tribes and to suggest that my tribe is doing everything that's virtuous. And there are people who have a vested interest in that polarization, just like our political culture, who benefit in terms of status and other things by being the most hyperbolic voices in that space. I would urge everyone, no matter where you're situated in the space, to ignore those hyperbolic voices in the same way that you might be a Republican or a Democrat, but you might say to yourself, the loudest Republican or the loudest Democrat is actually kind of insane. Like, I'm not going to take my cues from that person, even though I'm in this camp, right? And so I would say, like, if we think about what our goals are, that our goal is to build comfort with plant medicine, right? It is to what I think of it as shifting the Overton window. It is convincing the vast majority of people that do not consume plant medicine and in the near future will not consume plant medicine that this is a safe option, that it is beneficial for society, that it is a healthy alternative. We're trying to overcome a deeply entrenched historical stigma against a plant that makes no sense. And so I would urge all of us, no matter our economic interest, to think about how we get to that goal. To recognize, for example, that a largely unregulated hemp space, right, even though that might be seen as liberating the plant and might be satisfying to like some narrow constituency, that's never going to win over the hearts and minds of this country. And that is our goal, right, to embed this in this country's social fabric. Similarly, a highly kind of like restrictive, requiring, hemp operators to operate in this broken system. And I know they vary by state, but California being the best example, that's never going to get us there either, right? And so I don't think any of us have the exact solutions, but I would hope we remember that we are all, I think most of us, trying to achieve the same goals, helping people avail themselves of the wonderful benefits of plant medicine that I'm sure we've experienced recurrently in our lives, and breaking down a totally insane and counterproductive criminal justice system. And I can promise you that if we lose sight of those goals, if we're more intent on figuring out like who are the 5 people I hate the most, right? Like Kim Rivers, like who are the 5 boogeymen on the other side that I can post histrionically about? I'm telling you, this thing is going to fail. This movement is going to die, and other more nefarious actors are going to take our place in the same way that I mean, I hate to keep relating it to the United States, but in the same way that if we keep fighting each other, dude, like, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, like they're just going to be having parties. So um, I hope we remember why we're all in this, even if none of us have the answer, the exact answer.
Well said. Well, I love that answer because it makes me feel better about an answer I gave last night at the premiere of my mini doc. Somebody said, do you, I laid out one clear, very clear, and I think amenable solution to the case of Illinois. But that's a teaser for my mini doc. But one of the way I answered it last night was exactly how you just answered it, where it's like I have these ideas, but I don't claim to have an answer. And I think that's a great way that I think that's why I enjoyed my conversation with you so much today, Hirsch. And I just want to encourage people to follow you on Twitter. I've got it in the show notes so that you can connect with them. I've got other links that we may have mentioned as well. Do my best to throw them in. Sometimes I get high and I'll just throw in Hirsch's link so that you can connect with Hirsch. But anyways, Hirsch, thank you for sitting down with me. And folks, I hope you found as much value in this conversation as I did. Hirsch, we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you so much, Cole.
Yep. Take care.